Okay, I guess we'll get started here in a second. The few housekeeping things, Ken, okay. I was just going to ask if the council members could at least turn their cameras on so that I can see. So when you have a question, you can wave at me or give me a thumbs up or whatever, and then that way I can call on each of you. And then who do we have? I have two callers on the line. Who's on a phone line?
Jolene's on a phone line. Tracy's on a phone line.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Tracy's number 3.
We don't have a 1 and 2 though, right?
No.
Okay. Bob, are you on a phone or are you on computer tonight? Well, I see your mic's on, Bob. I can't hear you. We might have to have you call in again, Bob. I think we'll wait just a second. He's going to call in, so we'll wait a second till we can get him up and running and then start.
No, I think we're good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
8. Okay, all right. Just counting wrong.
Bob is muted. Maybe he just needs to take off mute, is what Floor says.
No, because he did take mute off and.
Yeah. It looks like he's on the phone. Oh. Oh, there we go. Caller 6.
Bob, can you hear us?
Sorry about that.
Nope, you're good. You're good.
I'm on.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, and then everybody just remember to mute so that we don't have any feedback or anything like that. So, okay, so we'll go ahead and start the meeting, and looks like everybody's present here tonight. So just to make a note of that, with myself and Vice Mayor Lutz here present. Any follow-up from our last council meeting by anybody? Nope. Okay. So we'll move on to our first item. We moved the item from the bottom, the ordinance establishing enforcement provisions related to COVID-19. That was moved from the bottom of the agenda up to the first item of the agenda because we have some other things that we need to discuss tonight, and this is obviously heavy on everybody's mind, so we'll get this out of the way so that we can focus on the rest of the items tonight and not be worried about this thing coming up. So with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to City Manager Napier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Good evening. It sure seems apparent to me that the die has been cast as it relates to this particular issue and the proposed ordinance, and so we really have the flexibility with regard to what council would like to see happen. I suspect that the first request will be to kill this ordinance and remove it from our pantheon of thought and all those kinds of things, and that's fine. What I would have you remember, however, is with regard to some of the items that we're dealing with right now pertaining to trying to curtail the spread of the virus. And indeed, it is far beyond the idea of 11 people gathering in a park at night or whatever, but more rather with respect to folks abandoning their quarantine and disregarding health orders and those sorts of things. And so, Mr. Mayor, do you mind if I engage you in that conversation a little bit, in that you've had a number of those direct conversations, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. So as far as
one of the bigger questions that you and I have talked quite a bit about, Mr. Mayor, is with regard to what to do with folks who are suspected, exposed, and awaiting testing, as it were, with regard to COVID, and their experience and stay, if you will, in some of the facilities that we know have that COVID exposure type status. That's been our biggest difficulty, our biggest struggle, and probably the most prevalent issue as it relates to direct contact with the public and increasing that spread.
Okay. So I think the biggest thing that I want to get out to everybody, and just to kind of catch you up on what's been going on the last few weeks. If you guys remember last council meeting, we came to you and asked for funds to pay for nursing at the Westwood facility and help pay for those funds. So I'm going to put some information out there tonight that just is going to kind of bring this into where our problems are at itself. The reason that we have Westwood facility set up as a quarantine location for people that potentially have the virus or have been exposed. That facility hadn't been used very much in the very beginning, but when we had a private medical institution here in town that started having positives, and in fact there were quite a few, and to date, out of the 34 positive tests we have, 22 of those have been directly linked to this facility. Clients that are in that facility are in there for a set amount of time, and once their time is up, they have to be released. We were looking at the releasing of 11 people, and 5 of those people, unfortunately, are homeless people. But there was no plan in place as to where to send these people to. And the answer at the time was to just release them and let them go about their lives. Well, to me, the problem with that is that they have all been in an institution where we have this virus is obviously a problem, and they've been exposed to this virus. And if we just blatantly open the doors and send them out into the public, we run the risk of this virus taking off in our community. And we're going to have far more problems than we do right now. So we put into place the Westwood facility. We needed to have medical staff to watch over these people. We put money in place to pay for those staff. We've had quarantine orders placed on those individuals that were to go in quarantine. But at the end of the day, the biggest problem we have is if they don't want to stay there, there is nothing ordinance-wise or state law-wise that require them to stay there. And we're currently waiting for answer from the state, which is, I think we're on several days now of not having an answer as to whether that order can be put in place to actually hold people there. So when we talk about an ordinance, the only ordinance that I'm really concerned about is an ordinance that would actually put people that have been exposed, that need to be quarantined, to make them stay quarantined so that we don't have sick individuals going out into our community and spreading this virus. Because if that happens, we're in trouble. And if some of these individuals are, and we've run into this, and some of these individuals are homeless people that have nowhere to go. And they're going to be people that are going to get on our bus system because that's their only source of transportation. They're going to go to Walmart, and they're going to go to the mall. They're going to go to all the places that people go to now. You go to get your groceries and whatnot. And if we're not containing them in one spot until we know that they are virus-free, then we potentially open it up to where this runs rampant through the city. The other area that, and it's not just patients, and I'll give you the latest example that's come out of this is we have the same institution, we have an employee that ends up becoming, is found to be positive for COVID-19. And that employee goes home, has a roommate that works at a different institution in this town. And of course, the one employee being positive for COVID-19, we would hope that anybody living in that household would in fact quarantine themselves so that they don't possibly spread the disease they've now been exposed to. But as of Friday, in this scenario, the roommate went to get a test done. Doesn't get the results back on Friday, they get them back on Monday. In the meantime, that individual's gone to work at the other institution, of which we've now had another patient come out of there, and has also attended 2 parties over the weekend, of which we are trying to track down who those individuals were that were at these house parties. So the question is, how far did this spread, or did it spread? Who knows? But these are the types of things that we're trying to put a stop to. We're trying, and I'll tell you, when I have not been able to answer the 800 emails I've received today, the phone calls that I've received today, and I appreciate everybody sending them. I hear what you're saying. I don't think that we need an ordinance, personally myself, to add other fines to people for not social distancing or being in groups of 11 when it should be 10. I don't think we should have that. And I think for the most part, most people have been doing a really good job of social distancing and following the orders and doing what they're doing. But in the last example that I just gave you, that is absolutely not following the orders. You have potentially endangered, I don't know how many people within this community, all because of the fact that you've gone out and now been engaged with groups of people, not knowing whether you're sick, but now come Monday morning, that person comes back positive for COVID. So now how many people have been out there, and it's these stopgap measures that we're trying to find a way. How do we quarantine people and make them sit in one location until we can show that they are no longer, whether they are sick or not, until we know that there's no symptoms, there's no virus in them to where they can freely go out into the public. I don't know the answer to that. We've been racking our brains for the last week on how do we take care of these issues, and that's the true issue at hand. I don't care about giving people a fine. I don't care if, and I'm not going to say I don't care. You shouldn't be doing it. If you've been closed down by the state, you shouldn't be doing the businesses or carrying on with business, period. But that's the least of my worries right now. My worry right now is the health of this community. It's letting people that are potentially exposed walk out into the community and get other people sick. And it's people that are knowingly potentially exposed, not quarantining and going about their business and engaging in things they shouldn't be in larger groups out in the public, i.e. house parties that have potentially made this spread. The people that attended that house party go home to their families and their families go back to work. That's where the problem is. The problem is not groups of 11 at the golf course. I don't care. Keep your 6 feet apart from each other. So that's where I see the problem at. I don't think we need an ordinance. We've got state law right here. We have state law in place that says that we are able to fine or arrest people if they violate orders. And we haven't had to do it yet, and I don't think we need to. So I think I got a little bit more on a tangent than what you wanted me to go on, but this is just, I just want everybody to understand that the biggest problem that we're having here is people that we know or know are potentially sick, to get them to realize that if you've been exposed to this, sit down and stay in one place. Do not help spread this disease. It's not a fine thing. It's not a jail thing. I don't want my police officers to have to go out, or our police officers to have to go out and arrest people or fine people. Let's just do the right thing so this doesn't spread, because if this ends up being, if it takes off in the community, then we're going to have far bigger problems than what we've ever thought about having. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for walking us through that very real-time situation that we're facing right now. I guess with that, if council had any questions or other ideas or thoughts that would give us direction from here, we'd be happy to take it.
Okay, and before I ask anybody your take on it, I'm going to tell you right now, if you guys ask me, this whole ordinance, no. Thumbs down for me on it, and I'll tell you my reason why. Again, I don't think we need to be arresting our way out of it. I don't think we need to be giving people fines. It's just asinine. The rules are in place. The state law is in place if we need to deal with it. What I really want is your take on what we're missing, what avenues we're missing on being able to take care of these issues with the people that have been exposed and get them to quarantine. And Councilman Huber, last week you and I talked about it, and I did pass along your thoughts as far as 381s and being able to danger to self or others. And somebody having a virus obviously going out into the public would be a danger to others, although it looks like that we're missing a portion of that to where we wouldn't be able to use it. So I'm telling you, I'm against the ordinance. I don't think it should happen, but I also am open to suggestions from council on how we possibly stop any spread of this for those that don't want to quarantine. Councilman Huber, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I personally do not favor this ordinance in the form that currently is in, because I think that there are some flaws in it, but I would be in favor of keeping this on our agenda for our next regular meeting next week. And my reason for that is because if we don't have this on next week's agenda, and if something develops between now and then we've missed the opportunity. You know, we've put off being able to take any action on it by a week, and that's unnecessary. I've received all the same emails and many of the same comments that I know that a lot of the rest of you have received. I'm not going to dwell on those. You all have seen them. But I will say this. I have become physically ill, and I've seen some bad stuff in my life that has never made me as physically ill as I have been when I see people saying that, well, not enough people have gotten sick, not enough people have died in Wyoming for us to have a big worry about this. My question to them and to anyone that would say that is, how many is enough? Do we wait until this is a raging inferno with thousands of people falling over? Do we do it when it's 500, 600, 700. I am really troubled by that aspect of things. But what I want to suggest is that there are current state statutes on the books. What I would like to see happen, and I have talked with Mr. Henley a couple of times today, kind of about this, and I forwarded an article that was written by a member of the Attorney General's staff back in 1996 that was very prescient on this. And when people say that, oh, no one could have imagined that this would have happened, as far back as 1996, the Wyoming Attorney General's office was looking into this and exactly what could not be done. And this article echoed a lot of the things, Mr. Mayor, that you just now said. It did not directly address the issue of people, in essence, willfully violating quarantine and going out and being irresponsible. But it did say that people that violate these orders as a general proposition, as a matter of state statute, can be fined up to $100 and or put in jail for some length of time. And that's 35-4101 for anyone that wants to look that up. What I would like to see is have Mr. Henley request a formal Attorney General's opinion as to whether or not police officers, city police officers, cite those kind of violations into circuit court if they see that occurring. And I think that might be one thing, because I am not a believer in piling one law on top of another if there's already a law on the books that addresses something. But what I would just urge is that we keep something on the agenda about this for next week's regular meeting. That we don't just kill this idea outright today, because I think that would be a very irresponsible act on our part and very short-sighted. Let's keep this on our agenda for next week, but let's do some real study and looking into it. Because like I say, the current form of this draft ordinance, I don't think I'd be inclined to support. But those are kind of my thoughts on it, and I think that there are this is an important issue. And some of the some of the rumors and everything, the rumor factory is just going wild. One person today even told me that the military is to seek the cure for all of this stuff. And I think that that's just absurd. But those are my comments, Mr. Mayor. And the bottom line is I'd like to see this kept on our agenda in some form for next week's meeting, but with revisions. And I'd like to request the city attorney to request that AG's opinion I mentioned.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I really appreciate your explaining the dilemma, because I think that's something that maybe isn't understood in the community. And of course, we all receive these emails and they all have legitimate points. I would encourage you to give the law enforcement and legal staff who are presenting this proposal to us an opportunity to explain their reasoning before we all speak out against it. Because I'd like to hear, and this is what I said in my response, in my experience, when things come to us in this manner, there is usually some reasoning behind it that maybe isn't immediately apparent. And so I would suggest that we ask for that reasoning before we reach our conclusions, because I also have grave concerns about this, but I would like to hear what the reasoning is.
Okay, so with that, Chief McFeeters, can you hear me? And if so, would you like to maybe answer Councilman Powell's concerns or question?
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. It's difficult for me to talk right now, so I hope you can hear and understand me. The primary concern lies in the vagaries that exist in these current statutes. The health ordinances are primarily civil. The health statutes are primarily civil in nature, and generally speaking, police officers do not make arrests for civil violations. We have conflicting legal opinions as to whether or not the statutes are enforceable this way or that way. There's many people that say, yes, absolutely, you can make arrests. Others, not so sure. That places the police officers in a very difficult position. I think we have adequate statutes in place for when we have somebody who is a confirmed COVID-19 carrier, who then chooses to ignore health violations and health ordinances or health orders from the governor or from the county health department. The gray area that is problematic for us is the person who is only suspected or is only possibly infected. To place people on 381s requires a sworn statement from both the officer and the doctor saying that this person absolutely is a danger to others, not a suspected danger, but as a bona fide suspected danger. And so the police officers right now is the inability for them to respond to the person who is just potentially a problem when we lack that bona fide information of knowing one way or another. Therein lies the weakness that causes us great difficulty in protecting our community. For example, from persons that may have been exposed at a medical facility but are being released pending without known results of whether or not they are carriers. And we lack the ability to require them to stay in any place or to self-quarantine at home. We lack the ability to carry that out whatsoever. Primarily, I would tell you that officers go to extreme lengths every minute of their career to avoid infringing on somebody's civil liberties that is deeply entrenched into our profession. And every aspect of our training revolves around that. And currently, this situation did not provide guidance for officers that are on the front lines of trying to do the right thing to protect the community from known threats. We don't have the tools that we need. In the legal profession, in law enforcement, we rely upon these untested areas, the concept of qualified immunity. But there is numerous case law that without an underlying specific statute or ordinance, my concern is that the judiciary would say, no, civil liberties are firmly established case law, and therefore there is no qualified immunity. So right now, the officers are in a tough spot. They work on education and instruction in order to gain voluntary compliance. But when we're faced with it, we lack the tools to be able to stop somebody who stands a high likelihood of endangering the community. Forgive me for taking so long, but it's hard to speak with a good cadence.
I'd like to just add on to what the chief was just saying too, because one last thought on when we talk about people that potentially have a virus that walk away from orders, and if they are potentially sick, if we were to arrest those people, where are we going to take them? If we take them to the jail and they in fact are sick, now we have just infected our jail population. So it's a true problem. This is a huge problem that we've been trying to deal with and find the best avenue that we can to take care of the not getting the sickness in the community. It's a huge problem. And every time we think we have an answer to one thing, we might be able to answer it, but there's another stumbling block that we fall under or over the top of. And I guarantee you that you put somebody sick like that into a jail setting, that's one of the worst case scenarios we could have. So, Councilman Hopkins, I saw that you had your hand up, and then I'll come back to you, Councilman Johnson. Councilman Hopkins? Bob, Councilman Hopkins, do you have a phone or?
I thought he was caller 6. I was trying to wait.
He's mute. Councilman Hopkins, can you unmute your phone? There you go.
Can you hear?
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
You can hear me? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Okay. I just want to bring a point of order, I guess. You know, everybody comments for like 2 minutes. We don't have time for this tonight to get through all of this. All give a speech. But what we need to do is consider what the governor has done. And I think the governor is headed in the right direction. The only thing I would suggest is that we talk to the Star Tribune. They are putting in the paper every day all of the restaurants available to do things, and they've got a little ad at the bottom of that. And I suggest that we have somebody, perhaps state office, or have a person capable of doing it. You do the 5 things you do today. You don't go out. You put your mask on. You wash your hands. I think we need to take this a step at a time, but we don't have time for everybody to spend 20 minutes speaking. So with that, I concede the rest of what it was.
Councilman Johnson.
Thank you. I was just going to make the same point that you made, that putting people in jail is absolutely contradictory to what we're trying to achieve, locking them in a building with 200 plus other people in close quarters. So I think a criminal ordinance, whether that be fines or jail time, is completely unnecessary, and I find completely constitutionally offensive even. So I would not support anything along those lines at all.
Councilman Cathy.
Oh.
There we go. I think most of us got the email from Mr. Henley earlier today. I don't remember looking back at it, but it was sent out, and it was talking about potentially the same letter that Councilman Huber was talking about. But down under the penalties for non-compliance, it says if somebody has been quarantined, and then it says, should an individual escape or attempt to escape from quarantine, that person can be re-quarantined and faces a fine or imprisonment. And that is backed up, the footnote refers to a Wyoming statute. Now, the facility you're talking about, where we're taking the quarantine infected people from behavioral institute and places like that, isn't that considered a quarantine facility? And then can't we somehow, even when they want to walk out, pick them back up and literally force them to stay there as opposed to taking them to jail? And doesn't that start to solve the issue you and the police chief are referring to?
Well, right now, I would tell you, without an ordinance in place saying that we would be able to do that, no. And we're also waiting for word from the state, I think the AG and the health sector themselves, as to give us an order that would allow that. But Mr. City Manager, do you have something else to add to that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cathy, very much at the heart of the concern with regard to many of these questions, in that the health office, at least health staff, I should say, have indicated that while the authority is there and those orders are theirs to make, the ability to enforce those orders and carry them out and so forth would have to rely upon local jurisdictions to make that happen. And so therein lies the problem. They don't really have health police, as it were, to carry out the enforcement of those orders.
As a follow-up, I guess I would ask if we could get a reading, for example, on WHAM Statute 35-4-105. And see exactly what that says and what authority that gives. But by the same token, for what you're trying to do, supposedly with this ordinance, is way over the top for trying to keep quarantined people in quarantine. And I can definitely see the problems with the local citizenry being concerned about, you go to the park and play with your dog, and, once this ordinance is passed, it then becomes the discriminatory power of the officer. And I am not sure that our citizenry wants that discriminatory power left with the police officer. And particularly after what happened with the drive-in churches and things like that. That was the discrimination of a police department and a local mayor. I appreciate you folks listening.
Councilman Johnson.
I just wanted to let you know that I have called in because my internet is spotty, so that's the other caller.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Bates, did you have something?
I do. I want to make it clear that I am 100% against this. With the amount of emails that we have received, the emails that had 1,000 signatures that we all was emailed, the amount of phone calls I've received, a dozen text messages, half a dozen, most of them all saying that they're against it. I know that we need to look at public safety, but yet our constituents, the city of Casper, are speaking out, and they're telling us what they don't want. And I think it's, we need to listen to those that voted us in. So for me, I'm against it. For the almost 100 people that are on YouTube that are listening to this, might be against it. And to all the emails, I'm listening to them and I'm saying this is a no-go. We need to ex-nay it.
Councilman Pacheco.
Thanks, Mayor. I get where everybody's coming from. I know we have all the stuff, the emails, the phone calls. We all got that. My question is then, what's our plan then? We'll strike down this this ordinance, which I'm assuming is going to happen tonight. Looks like the votes are there. So my question is that if we just let things as it is, and then we continue to do that? I guess I'm a bit baffled that we are strongly against it, and I don't have an answer. So what is our answer then for us to protect our community? And I know that things are being pretty good as we look at it. Things have been much better than other states and other communities, but we know that we don't know everything about COVID, what could happen. But my point is that what is our answer then? Do we just sit and wait and then that's it? That's my question. What is our grand plan then if we can't say, look, if you break your quarantine or whatever, we have no right to do anything. They're just going to go free. I don't know what our plan will be.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
So I agree with Ray. I mean, obviously, I think that we're to a point where we don't, as a group view going forward with fees and jail time is the right point of view, which I think we all agree with, at least most of us. But what I would say is we obviously do have a problem. The hard part is it would be absolutely fantastic if the AG or the health department or somebody at the state level would go ahead and clarify this for us as we have asked them to do. So I feel like the difficult thing with moving forward is we potentially run into a chicken before the egg kind of thing where we decide, maybe to recraft the ordinance and move forward. And then the next day we hear back from the state and they just take care of this in one sweep for the whole state. So the difficult thing there is, I don't know what we need to do to give them the demand that we need an answer right now. Because I have a feeling we're not the only community that needs this answer. It's probably everyone in the state. And so obviously we just saw an enormous amount of constituents exercise their rights as citizens and reach out to us and vent their opinions. Maybe we need to help them come up with a way or a standard narrative that they can send in to state officials to help us get the attention that we need on this issue.
All right, so okay, so I'm going to add to that just a second, Councilman Kathy, and I'll come back to you. We have had those discussions over the last 2 weeks in fact, last Friday, in order to get some things taken place and actually get quarantine orders that put people in Westwood actually did require us to make that step of going all the way to the top. And we talked to the governor's office, the AG's office, and the state health department. It moves rather slow, and if we continue to sit here and wait for something to get done at the state level, it's going to be a problem. It has been a problem. So to be quite clear on everything on this ordinance, I am totally against citations and fines for people not following orders. What I am in favor of is an ordinance for people that have been exposed, that are being placed in a quarantine and decide they don't want to be there without them being cleared medically to be able to enter back into our community. If we allow sick people in our community, this is going to take off. And I'm going to tell you, case in point, last week, out of all the people that came out of that institution and were put into Westwood, 3 people were homeless people that did not want to be there, and they walked away from there. So I want you guys to keep in mind that when that happens, and we don't know whether they're sick or not, if they're not allowed back into the mission and they go get onto our transportation system and they go to Walmart and they go to the mall or wherever, what is the potential that the rest of our community is getting sick because we don't have the measures in place to make them sit down until they have been cleared medically? That's my biggest concern tonight. This isn't a political anything. We don't need anybody else in this community sick. And so that's the answer that I'm looking for. What can we do, whether it's an ordinance that makes people stay in quarantine or not? Going and waiting for the state to give us an answer is not going to help us tomorrow if we have people that walk away tonight and people that get sick tonight. So that's the answer I'm looking for. Councilman Kathy.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Mr. Mayor, is that we're looking for something to protect the public from people that are confirmed positive that do not want to follow a quarantine order. And if that's the case and that's what we're looking for, then we should write an ordinance that affects that particular very specific issue, not this broad brush issue that this current ordinance would cover. And fortunately, unfortunately, I like the idea of one of the other members here that stated that we need to put out, and as I discussed with you earlier today, on the news medias and the newspapers, what it takes and what we're looking for. And I hate to put it this way, but people need to go to their proctologist and find their head to start looking and considering their social awareness, because over the weekend I needed to go to get an electrical part at Menards to fix a repair here at the house. I went there, I'm walking down a totally empty aisle that I have chosen, and here come two people gawking around, not paying any attention, walking directly towards me. Well, there's no way that you can maintain social distancing in that scenario, except I turned around and left and went and found another aisle and avoided people. But it wouldn't have taken them 15 seconds to have stopped, allowed me to pass, and then go ahead and they can have the whole aisle. But these are the types of things that people need to start thinking about and start looking at. And then your proposal to go ahead and have an ordinance to affect the positives that don't want to quarantine, I think could potentially help what you're exactly looking for.
Okay, Councilman Hopkins and then Councilman.
I'm done.
Okay, Councilman Hopkins and Councilman Huber. Councilman Hopkins, I need you to unmute your phone. There you go.
Microphone on. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're on.
Okay. Well, anyway, what I was going to suggest, we don't have a lot of epidemiologists within our city, and they are on state staff. But we do have a very, very good group talking in our town that are infectious disease doctors. There's a number of these guys, and I might suggest that we ask them kind of daily give city management an update on what we can do today. And just we've got these guys here, and they take care of a lot of people with a lot of serious infections all over the state. They come to Casper to do that. So perhaps we ought to take advantage of some of their expertise. Thank you.
Councilman Hopkins, to respond to that, every morning, every day of the week, we have 9 o'clock meetings with leadership that includes city council, county commissioners, the doctors that you're talking about, the health department, Wyoming Medical Center, school district, and we do. That's the recommendations that we work off of, is exactly what those doctors are telling us. Councilman Huber.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think that exactly the concerns that you and Vice Mayor Lute expressed, that what do we need to do, and that's the now is why we need to keep this item on our agenda for next week, even though most all of us, I think, don't like this current draft ordinance. But maybe we could have the city attorney draft an ordinance, a proposed ordinance, along the lines of what you had spoken about, covering people that are suspected that we have reason to believe have been exposed to people that have tested positive, limiting the scope of this quite a bit that way, and then if this item is on our agenda, then we can move forward in it in an appropriate way, or do nothing. But if it's not on the agenda for next week, then we have sacrificed and we've lost that opportunity. So that's what I'd kind of like to see happen. The other thing that I would urge is that a lot of people, anyone that's out there listening, you need to pay attention to what the news media says. A lot of these emails and people that I've talked to today have absolutely must have been living under a rock, because they said, well, I don't have any idea what the governor's orders are and that kind of thing. And those people need to start paying attention to the news. But those are my thoughts. Thank you. And that's my suggestion.
Anyone else have anything they want to add? Okay, Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. Is it possible to detain someone at the Westwood facility against their will, since we don't want to take them to the jail? Is the facility set up to allow that?
That's a good question too, Councilman Powell. To answer your first question, no, we don't. That's why we're talking about the ordinance, because we have nothing in place to detain them on. Secondly, that is a concern, is the facility itself, whether it's set up to detain somebody like that. But I'm sure that, because of their safety, but I'm sure there could be measures put in place to at least make that facility, get it to a point that that can't happen. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just so council is aware, we are working fairly actively, and I say we, it's really a larger coalition of partners that, along the lines of what the mayor mentioned earlier, to find a hotelier that would be willing to accommodate those folks who have, a little more comfortable environment to heal and recuperate in versus what would be available at Westwood. And so hopefully those kinds of alternatives will come to bear and will help us mitigate the problem. But as we all know, we may have to deal with the most wide component of these kinds of issues in order to have the right solutions to bear for everybody potentially.
Councilman Bates, did you have something?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate you calling on me. I think instead of leaving it on and discussing it next week, I think we should move it to another work session that gives the attorney some time to maybe adjust it, and we can do a longer discussion regarding it, and hopefully have a little bit more time, and we're not spending all night on it. Plus, if we leave it on until next week, how many callers are we going to get on? I mean, with the YouTube right now, we got 113 people watching this. And how many people are watching on TV that would want to call in and give their opinion? And we'll be spending all next week listening to hundreds of people possibly. So I think we need to move it to the next work session and see what can be presented at that point and take away the fines. That's my suggestion.
Councilman Bates, I'm going to respond to you real quick, and then I'm going to let Vice Mayor Lutz make a comment. But the only thing I would say to that is, if we put it off for 2 weeks, then we're not doing ourselves any favors in taking care of the problem today, because tomorrow somebody else could be sick and want to walk out into the community, and there's nothing I can do about that to stop somebody that's ill to go out and affect the rest of the community. That's a concern I have. We just mentioned that here, that if we put it off 2 more weeks, well, 2 more weeks from now we go through a work session, and then it's the following week that we actually vote on it. That's 3 weeks worth of time. And frankly, I don't think we have time. I wish the state would answer us right now. That's really what I wish would happen, but that's not happening. And so, unfortunately, it's come back to us to make a decision on this. And if people feel that an ordinance of making somebody that is potentially sick stay put until we can deem that they're not sick, if that's an overreach, then that's why we're here, and that's why we're making these decisions. But I would just tell you that I don't think time is on our side. Vice Mayor Lutz.
Just to clarify, because I know that this is going to be rampant on social media and discussions. When we're talking about the Westwood facility, we're talking about individuals that don't have anywhere else to go. If myself were to become sick or expect that I was sick, I would be quarantined at my personal home. We're not talking about rounding up sick people and putting them in facilities away from their families. That is absolutely not what we're saying. This facility is for individuals who don't have anywhere else to go. I just wanted to make that clear.
That's correct, and thank you, and I'll echo that again. And I can tell you the institute that we've been talking about that has a majority of these coming out of them, if they have patients that have plans in place, they have homes to go to, people to care for them, and they have people to be there to make sure they quarantine. These are for people that literally have nowhere to go and don't care to be held in one spot anymore. They want to be on their own and go do their own thing. Those are the type of people we're talking about that we cannot, in my opinion, we cannot let those people that are potentially sick out into the public until we can deem otherwise. It would be reckless I feel it'd be reckless on our behalf to allow that to happen because we're just asking for our community to get sick. And that's the only side of this ordinance that I'm even worried about is putting something in place to stop the spread of this virus further into our community. Any other comments from anybody? Councilman Powell.
Mr. Mayor, just another question now. With this staff member that had a roommate who went to these parties, they were advised to quarantine, but if I'm understanding the situation, they broke no law, and the term quarantine is really more of a suggestion than a requirement. Am I understanding the current situation correctly?
You're correct. Quarantine is a suggestion that they should quarantine at home. And I'm going to just go out on a limb and kind of seem a little bit mean here, but it is common sense, or you would think it would be common sense that if I am living in a house as someone with somebody that is sick, I would quarantine myself, and I would not go to work. I would not go hang out with my friends at a house party and partake in that activity, knowing that I've been tested and I haven't got my results back yet. We're talking about a weekend that at the end of the weekend, they tested positive. They got their results back. And so what is the what's the outfall of that? How far did this spread? And, did it spread at work? Work is another institution, just like the one that the roommate works at. So now do I potentially have two institutions in this town that we're going to see increased numbers in? Very good possibility. How many people did they hang out over the weekend? All from a poor judgment standpoint of my friend's sick, I live with my friend, I should probably make sure I'm not sick before I do this too. It's common sense. Absolute common sense, and I don't need a law, and I don't need a fine, and I don't need a threat of jail to tell people common sense will get us through this. That's all I'm asking. Use common sense and give me the tools to make sure that the people that aren't going to use common sense, we can put them at a location until we can actually deem that they're safe to be out in public doing what they need to do. Councilman Huber.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, to move this along, what I would suggest is that we keep an item on the agenda for next week. We give a thumbs up to keeping an item on the agenda for next week along the lines of what you have been talking about, because I think that you are absolutely spot on when you say we don't have a week to put her away. We don't have 2 weeks to put her away on this. We need to keep this on our agenda, and if we decide next week to move forward with something along the lines of what you're proposing, great. If not, at least we haven't wasted a week by just kicking the can down the road. So that's what I would suggest that we give a thumbs up to.
Okay, so Councilman Huber, I think listening to what you're saying, let's let staff work on a draft ordinance for an ordinance on the side of people that have been exposed, that have not been cleared yet medically of the virus, of being able to say that they're clear of the virus, the ordinance would detain, hate to use the word detain, but would quarantine them in a location with our medical staff until they've been deemed virus-free to basically return back into the community itself. And if we work on this draft ordinance, I believe that we could have that drawn up and probably ready for pre-meeting next week. And if there's issues with it, we could deal with that at pre-meeting then, is kind of the thought right now. Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with everything you just said. I think we should clarify who has the authority to determine that someone has been exposed, because there are people who will suspect that will be an authority that will be abused, or that there will not be sufficient evidence, or it'll be used as some type of retribution. I think we should make it very clear what the criteria are for determining that someone has been exposed and who makes that call.
I got you. Okay. Okay. Councilman Johnson. Sean, you're still muted. Okay. Is your phone muted? No. It shows all 4 phones are muted.
Can we unmute him?
Uh-uh.
Okay.
Yeah, he's not muted. How about now? Try it now.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
You hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I guess my question is, where does the enforcement come in then? So, I mean, you just said that people are quarantined to their homes. How are you going to make sure they're going to stay in their homes? I mean, we can draft an ordinance, but where's the action on that? I mean, to me, it just sounds like it's more of a, we're going to write an ordinance and you better stay home. And if you don't, then what? I guess is my question.
You know, Sean, I would say I can tell you on one side with Westwood facility, I think that would come into play with, we would obviously have a security component at Westwood that would take care of that for people that wanted to walk away. But to answer your question, as far as people that get sent home and that part of their release from wherever they're coming from is to quarantine, right now, no, we have no way of making sure that they would do that. I don't know. These are the questions that are hard to answer because I don't have an answer to the people that are sent home and decide not to do this. But unfortunately, if we do nothing at all, we're all going to be back in here answering the question why we didn't do something to stop the community from becoming sick.
Well, I guess my follow-up then is, if we're going to forcibly keep people who have nowhere to go, i.e. the homeless in one area, but we're not going to forcibly keep everybody else in an area, I mean, the ordinance would require people to stay at this facility. They have nowhere else to go. But what about everybody else? They're free to leave their house.
Were the people that were COVID?
But these people aren't free to leave the facility.
They're kept. It's the ones that are coming out with orders that are exposed or suspicious that have orders keeping them in place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilman Powell, I see where you're coming from. The question that I just asked, people that are at the institution right now where we have the most problem, those that are testing positive while at the facility are being kept in the facility now. They're not being allowed to leave until they in fact have a clean bill of health to be released. Those that have been released that have not, and unfortunately a lot of these are a lot of people that are younger are not seeing the symptoms, or asymptomatic, they're carrying it and they have no clue that they have it. But for those that are not showing the symptoms of it, are being released back home or back to whoever, as part of their release plan itself. And again, there's no way of enforcing that unless we had, unless you went to the extent of having an officer go there, and I don't think we should do that to go and make sure that they're at home. So I don't have an answer of how we would enforce that with those. I can only tell you those that want to walk away, that have nowhere to go, and we provide that facility. This would just basically ensure that they don't do that.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Mr. City Manager.
I just have an issue with, I'm sorry.
Go ahead and finish, Sean, and then I'll come back to the manager.
I guess the issue I'm having is only some people are being forced to stay in one place, and it seems to be the people that have nowhere else to go. They're being forced to stay in one place, but if someone else has tested positive for it and is sent home to self-quarantine, there's no enforcement measures for those people, and they can freely leave their house if they wanted to.
So I guess I'd throw the question back to you, Councilman Johnson, then. Do we go to the extent of anybody that's coming out of a facility like that has been exposed? Do we have them quarantined under the same orders until they have a clean bill of health and then are able to be sent back home? Or do you just do nothing, but then we take the risk of the community getting sick?
In my opinion, absolutely do not force people to stay in one place. I have a huge problem with, I'm an avid constitutionalist, and if somebody's committing a crime or stealing or killing people or whatever, then okay, but the Constitution doesn't end when people get sick. Life is about risks. Everybody understands the risks of COVID, and if you don't want to get sick, then you know not to go outside your house. If you step outside your house, you know that there's risks with everything in life. That's just life in general. So I won't personally support anything that's going to forcibly keep people locked up, whether that's in a jail, in a city facility, having cops sitting outside their house. I will not, absolutely will not support that at all.
Councilman Hopkins. Can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Bob.
Can you hear me now?
Now we got you.
Yes.
Okay, let's try again. Sorry about that. Typically, when you're discharged from a hospital, there is a discharge plan. And that discharge plan, one of the things that's required before you're discharged is that, and this is talking to somebody that's Medicare age, you have to have somebody that can take care of you. And so this seems to be the problem. So I know that Women Behavioral Institute discharges people pretty much automatically when whatever benefits they have tend to end. They're out of there. I mean, that's the way it works. And we all know that. And maybe they need to be held responsible. And I'm not sure we have any legal way to do that. But the bottom line is they know when they lose a benefit, that guy's cured. That's the way it works. And I know that's really coarse, but the bottom line is they are responsible. And corporate-wise, maybe they should be responsible for discharging somebody, or at least say, look, we can't take any more new patients. I'd like to put their feet to the fire. I'm not sure how we do that, but it bugs me. Thank you.
Councilman Huber.
Well, Mr. Mayor, there are a lot of points that people are bringing up. But again, I would suggest that what we need to do is we either need to give a thumbs up to for keeping something on the agenda for next week's regular meeting along the lines of what you have spoken about, an ordinance dealing with people that have been exposed, that we're waiting to see if they're infected or not, dealing with that situation, that keep that on the agenda. All of these other things, the concerns that people are raising about, well, who gets this and who gets that and all that stuff, those are all things that we can flesh out in the details of anything like that, because as we all know, the devil's always in the details. Again, I would just say that I agree with you. I don't think we have a week or 2 weeks to fritter around kicking this down the road. So I would suggest you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to keeping something on next week's agenda so that we can at least try to move forward with something then if we think we have to.
And Councilman Bates.
I just want to just say I agree with Sean on everything that he said. We can't, it's wrong to force people. I know we got to worry about people getting sick, but people need to be responsible for themselves. And so I agree with everything that Sean said.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I think some of the emails were that somehow we would take pleasure in restricting people's rights, or that we enjoy doing that, and those kind of comments are frustrating because none of us want to do that unnecessarily. But in response to Councilman Johnson and Councilman Bates, what do you say to the grocery store clerk? What do you say to people who are doing other essential services out in the community who can't stay home and could very easily be infected by one of these individuals who has been told to stay home, but they just don't want to or don't think they should? And so I don't like the idea of putting something in place that essentially makes it illegal for them to be out in the community. But I mean, the stakes are very high here, and I agree with Councilman Huber that we should continue to discuss this, and the people who don't want to move forward, they need to answer those questions, because we are fortunate that we have very low incident rates, but we can't take that for granted. Ours could take off very quickly if we don't continue to do the good things we've been doing. So I don't know. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and I don't know all the answers, that's for sure. But I sure don't like the idea of somebody thumbing their nose at a quarantine suggestion and going out in the community and infecting people willy-nilly, and that's a risk we're currently facing.
Any other comments? Councilman Kathy.
Well, we've been discussing here, received an email from Mr. Harrington, attorney at law, and he says, listening to the mayor's explanation, refer to Wyoming Statute 35-4-103. It provides for county health officer to pay police to enforce orders. There is an order. We don't need another ordinance. Now, sounds like we need to do a little more investigating along the lines of these state statutes and potentially come up with a better plan forward. Now, I don't know if that would necessarily mean calling a special council meeting between now and next Tuesday, but I know Councilman Huber is pushing to put this ordinance on our agenda for next Tuesday, but all that is doing is chewing, in my opinion, is chewing up a bunch of Well, it's upsetting a lot of people. We're going to be inundated by even more emails. And basically, we're going to spend next Tuesday burning up our life minutes, just as we have spent now an hour and a half discussing this amongst ourselves and can't get anywhere. I think as been stated, we have heard the public. They don't want any part of this. We need to come up with a plan. And from the email that Mr. Henley sent out earlier today, referring to some of these same issues, and with now again another one referring from another attorney to state statute, I think there needs to be a long, hard look taken at what these statutes are actually saying and developing a better path forward than what we've got right now. And I don't know, as a community of 250 people, are going to come up with much, except a lot of arguing and hate and discontent. I think we need to come up with a very sound plan to address your issues, Mr. Mayor, and then proceed forward with it.
All right, so how about if we put this on the table, that we table this and allow the city manager and city attorney to do further research into these ordinances, or not ordinance, state statutes that are actually on the book. They're the books to be able to see what we actually have out there that can or can't be enforced. And then if there is no enforcement to take care of what we're looking at, then we could go from there and prepare a draft ordinance that we could look at pre-meeting next week, not to be left on the agenda or take action next week, but be a pre-meeting so that we can see, they could come back and tell us what we can and can't do and where our deficiencies lie in order to get this accomplished. So that's what I'd put out there. Can I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down from everybody? Well, I think we got enough thumbs up. I got a couple that are not, but other than that, I think we've got 7. So we will table this, allow the manager and the city attorney to do the follow-up for us and bring it back to pre-meeting and do exactly what we just said to let us know where our strengths and weaknesses are on this. Anything else on this issue? Okay, Mr. City Manager, we'll move on to comp and class study.
Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Yes, sir. Councilman Powell.
I think it would be good for us to, I'm sorry. I think it would be good for us to acknowledge that there is a broad sentiment amongst the council to not move forward with some of the provisions in the proposed ordinance that have to do with assembly and businesses who are staying open in violation. I don't particularly like those things, but I think the sentiment is that we're more focused on the people who are individually creating risk.
And I guess to add to that, Councilman Powell, I think that what we're saying here tonight is we're taking that completely off the table. I think everybody's pretty much in agreement with that. And just the avenue that we're looking at where we have genuine concerns for public health, if that's fair enough to say. Okay, Mr. City Manager, moving on to the comp and class study.
Mr. Mayor, would it be okay if we took a quick break to get the presentation up so you could see that?
Absolutely.
Couple minutes.
Yep, we'll take, let's take a few minute break here and then we'll reconvene here about 5 minutes. If that works. Okay, thanks.
You gotta wash cash. What? So I literally like drop the cash, like sanitize my oh, don't worry, I tested negative. And I was like, yeah, candy.
Who else handled that money?
Oh my God. Well, the money is like, our U.S. currency is really porous. And so we've already been being like crazy careful with it. And like, really, oh, so I like called her after the meeting. I was like, what are we doing? And she's like, well, you know, obviously we, according to him, he's had a negative test. She's like, wear a mask in case you're asymptomatic. Like, he's tough. I was like, oh, good.
That is horrible. Well, horrible. Do we need to bring up the presentation here, or what's the approach? She's just going to share her screen. She's going to share her screen? Yeah, so Lori? Okay.
Yeah, I'm on the line. I'm not able to share my screen unless you make me the presenter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I did that when I sent you the message. That's why I wanted you to see if it would work.
Okay, well, when I try to share my screen, it says I have to ask the organizer to make me the presenter, so it's not recognizing that, unfortunately.
Okay. So,
I mean, I made her the presenter, and I don't know if she's tried it again.
Yeah, so I'm trying to, but when I click on share my screen, it says to share your screen, the organizer needs to make you the presenter. So it's not recognizing it.
It did that. I wonder if it says that your audio is not connected. Are you using a phone line as well?
I am.
Did you enter in the audio pin so that they're connected, your caller and your?
No, probably not. I didn't have an audio pin.
It should be, I just sent it to you, but it should be in your settings, what your audio pin is. I sent it to you though.
Okay, let me pull it up.
I can present from my screen if it doesn't allow you to.
Okay, yeah, I don't have any. Okay, now it says I'm the presenter.
It does?
It does. It just popped up.
Okay, good.
See if that's working. How does that look? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no worries. It was probably something on my side.
Hi, Flor. This is Hopkins. Can you hear me?
I can.
Well, I tell you what, I'm having trouble. I'm on my phone talking to you, but I try and turn the microphone on a little corner of my picture, and that doesn't seem to work. So what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn my phone on mute, and then I'm going to try and turn that one on if I can get in there like everybody else is.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
All right.
If you're talking, we
Okay, I
can't.
turned my phone on. Yeah, I don't know what the problem is, but it says the mic green, but it's not working. So I'll just continue to use the phone.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's all going through your phone. So unless you connect the call and the phone, which I'll show you how to do that before our next one.
Yeah, we'll work on it. My wife just told me she can't hear me, and I said, well, I'm on the phone.
You all just let me know when you're ready for me to begin.
Fleur, is there any way we could switch back to the multi-screen and then come back, or is it, are we going to be able to see everybody here?
Nope, she's presenting, so I can't switch back.
We'll look at the top ribbon and I guess.
Hey, Carter.
Yeah. Yes.
Can I ask you a question of an email that I got, or do you want me to wait until towards the end of the meeting?
How about toward the end of the meeting? Is that okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, sir. I can't tell who we have back and who we don't.
Mr. Mayor, Hopkins here.
Okay.
Are you having pizza delivered to us individually?
You know what, Bob? I forgot to place the order, but we'll get that done right after the meeting.
Well,
Okay, Councilman Huber, are you back?
This is you.
Okay.
Yeah, you could just give me your credit card number and I'll call and get that ordered.
All right.
I just had my lovely wife deliver me a sandwich and some drink, but unfortunately with social distancing, staying at home, she is not able to make home deliveries right now.
I don't know if Fleur can tell us if everybody's back or not, being I think she's running that, isn't she?
I mean, I can scroll over and see who's all on, but some of their cameras aren't on. Let me see. Councilman Huber, are you back?
There he is.
I never left.
Okay. So it looks like everybody's back then.
Okay, then we'll reconvene and go to the comp and classification study. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As you recall, this project has been underway for some time. I think we may have started earnestly back in November and have been working ever since with Graves Consulting. The owners of which are on the phone with us tonight, and of course you'll see here in a minute. They have done an immense amount of work with what I think are a really good cross-section of municipalities that serve, in my opinion, as very good comparables to generate some data that I think you'll find some interest in. The challenge, of course, will be with regard to the implementation and the way in which we implement, and so we'll need to dedicate some conversation to that a little more fully, pursuant to the what we learned tonight in the presentation. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn the time over to Ms. Belzer and the Graves Company, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. Ms. Belzer?
I really didn't have anything else to add. I was just going to let Lori Graves go ahead and do the presentation, and then if there's questions after, I'd be happy to help answer.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. This is Lori Graves. I'm hopeful everyone can hear me.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. And can see my screen as well. So first off, Mr. City Manager, Mr. Mayor, and council members, thank you so much for letting us take some time in your work session tonight. Obviously, you have a lot of important things to cover, and we will do our best to be efficient with our time and maybe give you back a few minutes on your agenda, which I'm sure you can appreciate. But we have been doing a lot of work. We have a lot to share tonight. I will try not to go through it too quickly. As I go through each slide, I will do my best to pause to make sure that if there are questions you'd like to address, you have an opportunity to do that. As Mr. City Manager mentioned, we have been working on this project. We kicked it off in December and have been working diligently along with the HR team and the leadership team and groups of employees to put this together. And I think that we have a really solid foundation for your comp and class study. So I'm going to scroll down. So just to reiterate, I believe you saw this when we met previously and went through the intent and scope. Obviously, it hasn't changed. And the key objectives are to ensure that you have a pay system that is going to help you compete, right? And additional to that, what we want is for that pay system to make sure that you're competitive, that it's objective, and that it's transparent. And there's been several things that we've done through this process to ensure that's the case. And the scope of our project was to provide recommendations, not just on your pay structure, but also to include a benefit comparison so that we're looking at the total comp aspect, to go through all of the valid market data, to create a defined market for the city, and then to include all of our recommendations, not only for the pay structure, but also for its implementation and its ongoing maintenance, so that what we leave you with is not just current and relevant for the city now, but it has everything you need to ensure that it can stay that way for the next many years. So just to give you a quick overview of the work we've done and the process we've taken in, obviously we came in and kicked the project off in December. We met with the full leadership team at that project kickoff, and we spent a lot of time really trying to understand current state, specific concerns that the city really needed to have addressed with this study. And we spent a good deal of time reviewing all of the individual positions, right? As a part of that, we met individually with all of the department heads. We also met with several different individual teams and groups of employees to ensure that we had a really good understanding of the different positions that exist within the city. We also facilitated a meeting with the leadership team, and you saw the results of that when we presented last time, to create that definition of market, meaning the municipalities and organizations that the city would use to compare themselves to when creating a market average. And in a minute, we'll go through a slide that reiterates that. In addition to reviewing all of the job descriptions and meeting with leadership team and meeting with individual groups, we also deployed a position description questionnaire that went out to a lot of employees. We received 105 responses, and that's another tool that we use to help really make sure that we had insight and we understood when we were matching your jobs to market that we were really doing that accurately, right? Not just comparing job title to job title, but really getting into the duties and responsibilities of the job. We previously shared the project overview with the council, and we also did employee meetings and shared with all employees the intent of the study and an overview of the process that we were going through. I believe those meetings were very well received. They were pretty well attended as well. And subsequently, we designed and deployed and then aggregated results from a custom compensation survey that we sent to all of those municipalities and organizations we identified, where we collected data on 42 benchmark positions within the city, and we also collected benefits information from them as well to use for the comparison. So again, after we had all of that data and had done what I would consider the foundational elements of this project, we pulled data not just from the custom survey that we created, but we also used data from Employers Council, which is a survey that covers a lot of Colorado, and we specifically used it just for the markets within northern Colorado that we had identified and agreed to include in your market. So we had a couple of different avenues for collecting information, and you'll see in a minute what the good response that we got from the custom survey and the data we were able to gather from Employers Council. I really feel like it formed a really solid foundation for the study, probably even more so than I was expecting at the outset. Again, just as a reminder, when we pulled the data, when we talk about pulling data from surveys, what we were looking for were the actual wages being paid to employees that are doing similar work for all of the positions that the city has, right? So not just to pull and compare pay range to pay range, but to actually compare the actual wages that are being paid and use that to create the market average. And again, we did that through all the things I've talked about, reading job descriptions, looking at the position description questionnaires, meeting with department heads, and back and forth, really being able to understand the roles. As we agreed up front, we also geographically adjusted the data. So for municipalities that are outside of your local regional area that have differences in cost of living, we made those adjustments to the data so that it would be an apples-to-apples comparison. We also, when we match positions, we adjust benchmarks as necessary. So if we match a position from a survey to a position for the city, but we know that there are a few fundamental differences. Maybe there's a difference in your experience requirement or the certification requirements that you have within the city. We will make some adjustments knowing that we understand the differences in the job. So when we choose benchmarks, we adjust them to make sure that they're as relevant as possible for your positions. And, you know, we talked about this before. What we know is that we're not always going to get perfect market data for every single position that exists within an entity, right, or that exists within your city. We hope to get the vast majority, and in this case, we did. Between our two data sources, we were able to match 153 positions to market, and that left us with just under 40 that we slotted, right, based on the other benchmarks that we had and internal equity. So again, what that means is that we could look at other positions that we had good data for, and we could compare that to positions within the city that we know are very similar in span and scope, and use that to help us place on the new pay structure some of the positions that we didn't have great market data for. So again, just as a reminder, this is the market that was selected, right, covered several state regions, so not just Wyoming, but several municipalities in the regional area. And what you see listed on this slide is the participants in the custom survey from that defined market. These are the people who did choose to respond to the survey, and we have data from and included it. As you can see, it's the vast majority. At the bottom, we list 4 municipalities in northern Colorado that we were able to collect data from the Employers Council survey. So it left us with a very comprehensive view of markets. I mentioned at the bottom there were 4 organizations that we didn't receive data from. And while we were obviously hoping for 100% participation, I think we got better than average. And the ones who didn't participate are the ones who were probably the least likely to have the best matches for your job. So I think that part turned out very well. So on the proposed pay structure, we're going to go through in a second. I'm going to bring up a slide that's going to show what we're proposing as the new pay scale and pay structure for the city. I want to point out a few things that are different from that structure than what you have currently, and talk a little bit about why. So on your scale, your general government scale, so this is all of your positions outside of police and fire, what we created were pay ranges that have widths that vary from 35 to 40% wide versus what you have currently in your structure. Each of your pay ranges are all 22% wide, meaning from the minimum of the range to the maximum of the range is 22%. And that's a fairly tight, a fairly narrow width, right? So we made those wider because what this gives you is a better ability for employees to move through that range based on their tenure and to be above market, which is where employees with much longer tenure should be. So widening that range gives people the opportunity to be able to move up and be really competitive to market, even with longer tenure. One thing just mathematically that happens, right, when you widen a range, it causes the maximum to go up, but it also causes the minimum of the range to go down. So understanding that you may have a few ranges, there may be a few positions towards the lower end of the pay structure where the very bottom of the range may not have as much utility for you, and you would need to have a little flexibility on your higher end rate for just a few of those positions. Another thing that I would like to point out about the pay structure is that your current structure is divided into pay bands, right? A, B, C, D, E, like that. We built these without bands. We built this all in one pay structure. And we like that for a couple of reasons. It is easier to move positions around on the structure as the market moves for those positions. But really, the other thing we really like about it is it doesn't create what we would call these arbitrary silos, right? Where people feel like, oh, well, I'm a coordinator and I'm at the top of pay band B and there's nowhere else for me to go because I have to stay in B because I'm a coordinator, regardless of how the market might change for their job, right? So we eliminated those bands or silos. We also made each of the pay grades a little bit further apart from each other. So right now, each of your pay grades that exist are around 5% apart from each other. The ones we built are all 10% apart at the midpoint, and you'll see that when I show the structure. By doing that, what it did was dramatically reduce the number of different pay grades that you have, which in our view creates a simpler design that is not only easier to manage, but is easier to communicate, right? The better people can understand it, the more trust they have in the system, and simpler is almost always better to understand, right? And really the key difference here, and I probably should have put this at the top, is that we built this new pay structure as what we call an open range, meaning there are not predetermined steps built in along the way. It is an open range, and specifically what we like about that is the flexibility that it provides for the city to ensure that you can continue to move people through their pay range, but you can also do it in a way that is affordable, right? I include on here a comment that steps could be added. You could keep the same structure and the same range and add steps, but that's not our current recommendation. So now that we've talked about it, I don't know the size of the screen that you're looking at, so this may be a total eye chart for some of you. And again, it's certainly not important that you commit this to memory. I just wanted to show you a visual representation of what we were talking about on the slide earlier, right? What we have created are these grades from 10 to 33, and the numbers are completely arbitrary, right? You can use whatever numbering or naming scheme you like for pay grades. I always use a number, and I generally start with 10 instead of 1, just because my experience has been that nobody likes being in pay grade 1, right? That just feels somehow punitive, right? So I don't start with 1, but the numbers can be anything that you need them to be. You can see that calculates for each range the range spread, and what we have is the ranges 10 through 21 are 35% wide. Above that, from 22 on through 33 are 40% wide. Again, it's a fairly standard compensation best practice, but as you get into positions that are higher up and more responsible in the organization, the pay ranges are generally wider for those. And again, the midpoint distance is simply the difference between the midpoint of each grade, right? From grade 10 to grade 11, that's a 10% increase, and that stays the same all the way through the structure. Having a structure like this makes it easier to adjust the entire structure over time, but to keep it, when you have really small amounts of distance between your pay grades, you end up with a lot of overlap, and that can be challenging when people move from one position to another. So that's one of the reasons we like this structure. I know I've covered a lot there. I want to pause for just a second if there are questions on this before we move on. Okay, I'm going to assume silence is consent that you're ready for me to roll ahead. So to just go through the high-level impact of these proposed changes. So when we built this pay structure, obviously we have now looked at it and compared that against your current census data, meaning your current group of employees and the jobs that they're in and their current pay rates, right? And a couple of things we wanted to point out here. One is that what you will find when you see the details eventually, the actual classification listing, you'll see that some of the positions have changed relative position on the listing, meaning they are not grouped with the same jobs they were grouped with before. They might be higher or lower than jobs they were grouped with before, because this is based on current updated market data. And so some of those changes have occurred. The good news, what I think the really good news, honestly, for the city is that when you look at the impact to where people currently are, there are only 3 positions that have current incumbents who are below the minimum of the new proposed range that they've been put in. And there are only 11 positions that have incumbents that are at or above the maximum of the new range that they're being put in. And so that is, in my view, a lot less displacement than many times you see, right, in converting to a system. So there will be a little bit of work that needs to be done and money that needs to be spent to bring people below the minimum of the range up. But of those 3 positions that are below, 2 of them are part-time positions. So again, the impact, the financial impact on that piece will be fairly minimal. By extending the width of the ranges, what we've also done is relieve a lot of the compression that was occurring at the top of your pay ranges. You had a lot of people who had been with the city a long time, and having ranges that were 22% wide and that only had 5 steps in them was causing a lot of people to be maxed out, right? They were at the top of their range. That was currently that's about 53% of your population. And when if this new structure is adopted and implemented, there will only be about 2 to 3% of your employees that will be maxed out in their range. Again, we talked about some of these elements, right? The wider ranges give you more upside for potential. The open range system eliminates that heavy front loading that we talked about that was occurring in your current system. Getting a 5% pay increase, right, when you get a step is a great pay increase. And when there is an adjustment to your structure, like a market or COLA adjustment on top of that, it's great. It's a windfall. But then once you hit the top of the range, you might go many years with you don't get another step, and you're only going to get market adjustments as the city can afford to do that, right? So this eliminates some of that front loading. And again, for the city, what is nice is that because going from a step program to an open range system is a much easier implementation than going the other direction, right? Moving into a step plan or even from one step to another is tough because you have to figure out where to place people in their steps, and there is usually a significant amount of cost associated with that. An open range system, it gives you a lot more flexibility, so that's one of the reasons we think it's a good fit. So we did look also separately for the police pay structure because it is our experience and it is our recommendation that typically you see police pay structures separate from the general government scale. And while we are recommending an open range system for the general government scale, we are recommending that the police pay structure stay on a step-based system. That is what's most common in public safety and in law enforcement in particular. And so we've provided 2 separate options for how you could structure police pay, but both of them are still step plans. The first option is what I would call just kind of a tweak to what you have right now. It adds 1 step to the master police officer, making it 6 steps, and it slightly widens the range. But the rest of it is very much like what you have right now. The second option, which is actually our recommended approach, is a little bit broader, and what it does is combine your police officer and your senior police officer into one position, and it makes it a little bit wider. It makes it a 7-step system and widens it to about 28% so that it gives your officers a little bit more ability to move up and receive pay increases a little bit longer before they have to get into a kind of a competitive situation to get up to master police officer or into some of the management level positions, right? We feel like this is a good option to not just manage costs, but to also keep your police pay structure competitive and allow you to retain officers and not lose them when they get to the point where they're maxed out and it doesn't look like they'll have a pay increase for a while. When we put in these additional steps, for steps 6 and 7 in our recommendation, they are less than a 5% increase. So the first few steps remain a 5% increase like you have right now. but step 6 and 7 come down from that a little bit so that it is widening that range and bringing that annual increase down a little bit, but spreading it out. Kind of the same intention we were trying to address with general government, giving people the opportunity to receive pay increases for a little bit longer. All of the range minimums and the maximums that we're proposing are above what is on the current scale for officers, so there's no one who will receive less pay or less of an increase than they would in your current STEP program. Sometimes that can be challenging to accomplish, but it was nice that it worked out this way because that also makes for a much smoother and better received implementation. The one thing that has come up and that I do think is important to address is that because you would potentially be in a situation where you have all of your general government employees on an open range scale and you have your police still on a STEP plan, you would probably want to create some type of an agreed upon approach up front. So if and when the city finds itself in a situation where financially you are not able to fund pay increases for your employees on your open range system, what does that mean for employees that are on your STEP system? Right? So I'm not saying that I have drafted that, but I'm saying I do think it's important that you think about in advance, now that you have different mechanisms for pay increases, how those are going to correlate with each other when there might be limited funds available. And if that's something you do decide to address, obviously we can provide some guidance and direction for you. So we'll move on to the benefits comparison. So we did talk about the fact that this was a total compensation study. So in addition to looking at base pay, which is mostly what we've been talking about, we did also look at the key components of some of your benefit plans. And this information was gathered from the custom survey that we sent out. So without reading you every single line off of this, really the good news is, and the takeaway, on your health plan, you are very competitive. We have what I would call a suggestion, not so much a recommendation. Your health plans are competitive in the variety that you offer, and they're also competitive in the cost of what they're costing your employees. The only thing we noted is that there are a few organizations in your defined market that offer high deductible option plans with a zero premium cost for employees. And it's something that I've seen gaining more ground and is getting to be kind of an interesting option. And because the city is already paying the vast majority of the cost for your higher deductible plan, it would not be a very expensive transition, but it would certainly be a great communication and probably a really good recruiting tool. So again, it's a suggestion. I think it would be makes sense to look at. When it comes to paid time off, really you are only slightly under market, and that's really only in one element. So as we looked at paid time off, one of the things we asked with the people in your defined market, if they were on combined PTO plans where they combine vacation and sick and everything together, or if they're on separate plans. And they're basically all on separate plans the same way the city is. So I think that's a level playing field. The only difference that we noted is that in the level of vacation that employees accrue that have between 1 and 4 years of service, you are below average market on that. The average of the market is about 100 hours of accrued paid time off per year for people in that segment. And currently the city is offering 80. So our recommended increase is that you move from 80 hours of paid time off in that 1 to 4 year mark to 96, which is close to the average market and still a good round number as far as 8-hour days. Retirement is also a bit of a mixed bag. So when we look at the retirement plan, obviously defined contribution plans like you have are very much the norm. It is what most people have. And when you look at the contribution rates that the city provides for your general government employees, meaning other than police and fire, you are very competitive, above average market. The contribution at 9% is higher. The average of the market we looked at is 6.37, right? So you're very good there. Where that is not the case is when you look specifically at police. So in that same defined market for all of the respondents, the average defined contribution retirement plan, employer side retirement contribution averaged at about 11%. And with the city coming in at 8.6, that is definitely below market. So that is another area where we're recommending a phased in increase. right? That's not one of those things that you immediately go in and change all in one fell swoop. But we do think that's something that it's probably something that you had already identified, but that's something that creates opportunity and puts the city at a little bit of a disadvantage. Okay, so just a handful of additional recommendations, and again, there is a lot more detail coming. We have a full and final written report that is, I think, 12, 13 pages that it comprehensively covers a lot of things, but to give you an overview of some of the additional recommendations we've included, we are proposing a redesign of several of your administrative positions to consolidate them so that you don't have as many different job titles and different job descriptions for people that are doing essentially the same type of work. We did some consolidation and aligned those to markets. There are a few positions where we recommended adding additional levels, right, like a senior or a lead or a level 3, so that there is more ability for you to retain people and provide some career progression. We are recommending that for most of your job descriptions, not all, but most, you add educational equivalencies, meaning don't necessarily limit yourself to many positions list a minimum qualification as a degree. And for a lot of positions, that's not completely necessary, right? So I see a lot of employers who are giving themselves at least the flexibility to say that while a degree is preferred, that a certain amount of job experience can operate as an equivalency. So we're just suggesting that some of that language be put in there. I think it allows you to have a wider pool when you're recruiting and also when you're promoting internally. We are also proposing that the city adopt a process, and again, this is something that we really strongly encourage all of our clients to do, to help maintain internal equity and to prevent pay compression when you are in an open range system, right, so that each step is not predefined for pay increases. It's really important when people are being hired or people are being transferred and moved into positions that you have a process that before that offer is made, that HR can be in a collaborative discussion with the hiring manager to ensure that the rate you're looking at hiring someone in at is not going to create compression or inequity with existing employees you have in those positions, right? So we see this as being an ongoing form of maintenance so that you don't find yourself with pay compression years from now that is rampant, that costs a lot of money to create if you deal with it individually, right? So you may adjust the higher offer that you make to somebody, or you may simply hire somebody at the rate that it takes to bring them in, and you might have a handful of people you might need to make equity pay adjustments to ensure that you're not creating compression. So simply having a process to do that is important. And as I believe you probably suspected, our recommendation is that the implementation of this pay structure is going to be a phased approach. And phase 1 is really kind of as simple as placing all of the employees in the new range and making adjustments just for those that fall below the minimum of the new range. So with that type of an implementation, the very first piece of this will be relatively inexpensive, very low cost. Now, there is still ongoing implementation that needs to happen after that, and we will address that thoroughly in our final report. There is a way to, once you've brought people into the new ranges, determine who should be higher in their range based on their experience and length of service, and to make adjustments based on that in future, through future pay cycles. So we'll address that more fully, but I just want to mention that. And then really this is where we're left with, right? The final steps. We are very close after, I think now, right at about 4 months of working on this project. The final steps we have left, we have provided a draft of our final written report, and then that's in the process of being reviewed, and we're making sure we haven't missed anything and we don't have any additional items that need to be included or reworded. That draft is going to have the detailed overview of our whole process, all of our findings and recommendations. It includes the actual proposed pay structure and the classification listing, meaning which pay grade we would propose putting every position in, and a lot more detail on the implementation and ongoing maintenance. And following this presentation to each of you, what's really left is then to present results to all of your employees. One of the things we said when we came out and talked about this with them in January was that we were going to come out at the beginning and tell them what we were doing and the process we were undertaking, and that we would then come back at the end and say, here's what we found and here's what's coming next, right, for the city. And so obviously we have some, have to resolve how that's going to happen, whether we're going to do that through some type of a virtual forum like we're on today, or if we're going to delay that and do it when we're able to physically come on site. We can figure that out later. But this is where we're at, and then the project will be wrapped up. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Mr. City Manager, I would ask if we could maybe go back to the other screen so and have everybody turn their cameras on so I can see if anybody has questions.
Did you copy that, Fleur?
Yeah. Hopkins here, I have a question. You're talking, you say Hopkins?
Go ahead, Councilman Hopkins.
Okay. This is Hopkins. Are you?
Yep, go ahead. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, I am really impressed with Graves Consulting. This is a really, really good analysis of where we stand. The idea of getting rid of predetermined steps is really a wonderful thing. It fits the world better than where we are. The overview that they presented, we do have a number of people will be, adjusted, but I am really impressed, and I'm looking forward to seeing paper that I can sit down and read. But quite honestly, Lori, I just wanted to tell you that I think you guys have done a good job, and I really am glad that you talked the Employers Council. They used to be called the Rocky Mountain Employers Council, but they are much bigger than that, and they are a really good asset to compare how we're doing. So I think we're in the ballpark, and am looking forward to seeing your final document. Thank you. Hopkins, over.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Councilman. I really appreciate it. We worked hard on this, but I can tell you that it was definitely a collaborative effort. And if it weren't for the work and the dedication of your internal HR team and your internal leadership team, we would not have been able to get this far.
Okay. All right.
Sorry. There may be other questions. I'm not sure.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Pell, I can't see all the council people at the moment, so Councilman Bout, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Graves, as I'm sure you're aware, many of us have had concerns about a pay scale that has basically 5 steps, and then people are pretty much frozen at that point unless we do COLAs. Did you get comments on that from the employees? Was that a widespread concern that the pay scale needed to provide more upward mobility for people as they put in additional years?
Yes, thank you for that. And yes, we did. That was a very common theme that we heard in the meetings that we had with employees, not just the individual sessions that we had with certain groups of employees, but when we came out and did the larger presentations for all employees and went to different locations. We listed that as what specifically one of the areas that we were looking to address with the study, and that was the one that I think everybody resonated was they were struggling with as well.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions from council? She has to quit. Oh, I'm sorry. The screen sharing has to stop from the host being Lori. No, she has to turn it off.
Hey, Lori, can you turn the presenter back to Fleur?
Yep.
Thank you.
I can.
We don't want to lose you. We're just needing to get the screen back.
I think we will, though.
Yep. Nope. Understood. Let's see if I can stop sharing. I can pause it. Let's see if I can stop it.
at the bottom, there should be a little button next to mic, camera, and then screen.
Yep, there usually is. I'm trying to find that. Yep, there we go. That should have done it. How's that?
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from council members? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I would say that the next steps are to evaluate the information that you've been given, obviously in somewhat abridged form. We will get the final document here soon, and that will set the stage for some budget conversations that we need to have by way of implementation and structural implementation as well as we move forward. So for right now, this was information only. We don't need any hard decisions tonight, but it will indeed set the stage for conversations we need to have further on this matter.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. City Manager, we will move on to our WHAM resolutions.
Yes, sir. Thank you. As council is aware, and I think we've talked about to some degree, the resolution process that is an annual process in conjunction with WHAM is upon us now. And so what we've done is we've taken some of the outcomes that we've seen as being sort of uncompleted from the previous legislative session. And we've put together some staff ideas based on some of the other conversations that we're seeing remain with legislators and potential committee assignments and so on. And we have the list that we've submitted to you for your consideration as potentially your resolution agenda that we would forward to WHAM during the summer efforts to put together the resolution list to take to the legislature. As you know, we are not having a summer convention this year, and so the ability to, sort of debate the resolutions and so forth are going to take place in a very different mode this time. But nonetheless, the need to represent the council with resolutions of interest is still in place, and we need to get your direction. We have a prompt in front of us, Fleur, that we can't see the rest of the council. Do you see that?
Yeah, I just texted Amanda. If she just goes and turns that off on that laptop that's on the podium behind you.
Okay, perfect.
You just have to hit the X in the corner.
Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate that. So if it pleases the council, what I'd like to do is go briefly through the resolutions. Jolene is on board here tonight as well to make sure I don't miss anything or miss details that you should have, and see if you concur. And if there are other resolutions that you'd like to see included, tonight would be a good night to have that discussion, or we can bring back some thoughts that we could, research for you and take that portion up at another time here prior to the process concluding, if that's okay with all of you. Mm-hmm. All right. So the police chief had a real significant role in working with WASCOP, which is the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs, to discuss the gambling legislation that came forward, the gaming legislation that came forward, and there were various iterations. What you see in front of you is a result of that, wherein we now have a gaming commission that is coming into effect, and we would like to have your blessing, so to speak, and hopefully WHAM support to develop a coalition not only with WASCOP, but also with WHAM itself, and also potentially the County Commissioners Association, to work with the Gaming Commission to put together some policy directives and other initiatives in regards to dealing with the gaming legislation that we have before us now. Not really a legislative matter, but certainly a coalescence that we need in order for the Gaming Commission to hear all the appropriate feedback as they get underway with their efforts. Any questions about gaming and these matters?
Looks like we're good.
All right. Moving on then, the eligible landfill remediation program is a credit program that we have been fortunate to be able to develop over the years to the extent that we have a rather significant balance. The problem is that the legislation that's in place does not allow us to take advantage of this credit balance, if you will, to work on projects that we have and to effectively reimburse us for projects that we've undertaken in the past. Jolene, am I missing anything on that particular item? Evidently not. And so our hope is that we can enact legislation that would allow us to grab those credits and bring those home and work with the others to make that happen. Otherwise, we're concerned that they may never be freed up given the current legislation. And then we are, of course, out those credits that are very appropriately the city of Casper's. Any questions on that one? Jolene, last chance.
Do it. Let's go.
All right. Councilman Hopkins says, let's move.
I'm gonna try it again. I'm gonna try it again with the mute button. Can you hear me, Carter?
I can hear you now. You bet. Sorry.
Carter?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Sorry, on the mute button. The only thing, Mayor and Council, that I would like to add to that is that this is only impacting right now 3 cities in the state. Only 3 cities and landfills are not ever going to be able to collect their credits unless we can get some change in the statute.
We have to do it now.
Agreed. Thank you, Jolene. Appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the privilege. The clerk's office put together the next one, if I may go ahead and proceed. And with respect to posting of liquor licenses, at this point in time, it's a fairly significant staff effort to get these licenses out to the places of business and actually physically post them ourselves. We're hoping that we can get a little relief from that effort and maybe WHAM's support to ask the legislature to consider a difference that would require the business owners themselves to post the notices. Fleur, am I missing anything on that item?
Nope, I think that's exactly right.
Perfect. Any questions that I can entertain on this one?
No question.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Councilman Kathy.
So there were 2 questions.
Yes. So this is not that they're not going to be published. It's just a matter of getting the business owners to publish them rather than the city. Is that correct?
Councilman Kathy, Mr. Mayor, that is it. I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, do you have something you want to add?
Well, just for clarification purposes, so it is not really publishing. We do the publishing through the paper, and we handle all of that. They do have to pay for it, but as far as posting, we just have to post a notice that there's going to be a public hearing. So essentially, it's a little notice on a sheet of paper, and then we physically have to post them ourselves. In the past, what we've done, when we weren't clear on the statutes, it's just sent it to them and had them post it in their own establishment where people could see. Now what we're doing is going to each establishment and posting it. But the publication is all still done by us. That's not what we're saying with this. It's just the posting of that notice.
Okay, so it would be up to the establishment to post the notice.
Correct.
Correct.
Oh, so, well, what my concern was is that there still will be notification and primarily for the new licenses, that things will be out there in the public and there will be something posted either on the establishment or in the vacant lot that there's going to be a liquor license potentially established there so that everybody knows where it's going.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that's absolutely correct. None of that will change.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I thought I saw Councilman Bates' hand, but.
Councilman Bates, did you have a question?
No, Steve asked my question, so I'm good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Moving on. The next one deals with the state's efforts at obtaining full transparency as it relates to reporting of salaries and names of government employees. I think in their efforts to capture that full extent of transparency, left out a number of government employees and officials throughout the state. As a matter of fact, they really only included the cities and the counties. And so we're confused by that. And we thought in the effort of obtaining true and full transparency, indeed, there would be others that need to be included. The state, for example, and their employees and their officials, school district and their employees and officials, and so on. We don't understand why those huge political subdivisions of the state would be ignored in this effort, and consequently, we are posing that question.
Any questions on that one? Councilman Cathy.
Yes, I guess the big thing I'm concerned about is the publishing of the names. I almost think that's an invasion of people's privacy, that you could publish salaries if you want and state a position, but publishing the names, I think, is doing nothing more than putting a target on people's backs and starting a controversy and a picking contest over who's making what. And to me, this is just the same as publishing the names in public record of every person that has a concealed carry permit and some of these things. Publishing the names of every person that has a driver's license. To me, this is a total invasion of people's privacy with the names going along with this. I'm done.
Well, did you have something you want to respond with or not? Okay, Councilman Johnson.
I will say that names have been published since as long as I can remember. My name and salary has been published at the county level. So, I mean, it's always been a thing as far back as I can remember.
Councilman Hopkins, did you have something?
Yeah, I agree. I don't mind publishing the position, but publishing the names is wrong in today's world. I grew up in a world where in a small business in high school, I could go get everybody's name that was tied to their license plate, and you could just walk over to City Hall or county seat, and you could get a whole printout of every license plate that had everybody's name tied to it. And in today's world, that is not a good, and we can't do that anymore. We can't possibly do that. And to have a name tied to a salary, that you as a target, because they could target your name, they know where you live, and so it's wrong. Just don't do it. Publish positions and salaries, but that's fine with me. Thank you.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with promoting this resolution, and I also agree with the statements made about not having the names published. I think the logical result, if we were to push this fairness idea, is that a much larger group of people would voice opposition, as opposed to picking off a small number that might not have the same degree of influence. And so I think by saying, let's have everybody do it, it will in fact be the argument against doing it at all.
Councilman Huber.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think that if I understand this resolution, the overarching problem is that in the past, cities, towns, and counties, they've had their all this information published, as Councilman Johnson said, but oh no, not the state. And my understanding is that this resolution is directed at trying to equilibrate that amongst all political entities, and I support that part of it. I think, I lived my entire adult working life with my salary and everything else being public, and I just thought that was part of working for the government. But I can go any direction on that aspect of things. But I do think that the main focus of this, if I understand it correctly, is the idea of having all political entities handled the same, and I support that idea.
Councilman Johnson.
I just want to say that I agree with Councilman Huber, but at the same time, I can go either way. It doesn't bother me one way or another. But I do agree on the fact that if it's a requirement for one political entity, it should be for all.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, what we can do then is alter the language that we have here in draft form for this resolution to include the idea of dropping names and, try to emphasize the idea if they're going to do it for one, they need to do it for all, and in full manifestation of this effort to pursue transparency. So we'll bring that back to you and make sure it meets with your approval. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. The other issue here is with regard to seasonal employees. We have had a number of conversations in varying degrees as it relates to seasonal employees, and the problem that we have is that we're hamstrung with respect to unemployment costs that we have for seasonal employees, and consequently, the more savvy seasonal employees can work it out in such a way that they effectively hamstring municipalities to the extent that they can have a salary for a full year based on the benefits that unemployment allows for an employee who really is employed for the period of a summer or a winter, or depending whatever season it is that they would be gainfully engaged in a job. We're hoping to see some changes there. Jolene, did I miss anything on that point?
No, I think you have all of it. On all the resolutions we've submitted, Mayor and Council. Is there anything else that's a question, Carter? I have one thing that I would like to emphasize, I guess, on the whole WHAM process.
That is, Mr. Mayor, the last resolution we wanted to submit for your approval. And as Jolene is mentioning, if there are other things that we need to address in the form of a resolution that we don't have here, we would absolutely take that feedback and bring you back something to review. Otherwise, if we have your blessing, we'll prepare these for your formal consideration.
Okay, and I will have a question in a minute, but Councilman Bates, go ahead first.
So with the resolution on employer status for collecting unemployment, I kind of have a concern with that, not allowing them, because I guess, what would that do to the people that are seasonal employees that come back year after year for parks and recreation, and anywhere else that you use them at Hogadon, at parks, at pools, and all that? Would that stop those people from possibly coming back where that could, because they don't get paid that much, that might be something that they look towards while they're going to school? Just a thought that I think is the city hurting themselves by taking that away?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, that's a very reasonable question. We happen to think that we won't lose those seasonal employees that we generally get year after year, but we do think we'll have some concern as it relates to seasonal employees that you know, we have to shop for consistently. So we're hopeful that we'd be able to keep the ones that are very, you know, more permanent, if you will, that come back year after year. But we will have to have an effort to find others year after year as well.
Councilman Bates, you have a follow-up?
I do. I just want to say I don't think I agree with that one. That's me personally. I don't agree with that one.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was a guy that grew up a number of years ago, and from the time my wife and I started going to college, I knew that I had to have a job in the summer and a job in the winter, and I had to move locations to get it. And so I never collected 1 penny of unemployment when we were going to school. My wife and I were both going to school. And I'm thinking, okay, if you want to work part-time, you work part-time, but you're not entitled to unemployment, because that's certainly not a career path. So with that, we can't give these people money just because they work for us for a few months. I'm sorry. Thanks. Bye.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
I completely agree, Bob. I guess to me, it is known up front that these jobs are seasonal. This isn't something like that we're laying off a full-time employee that works for us year-round. Obviously, that individual should 100% be entitled to benefits. That is their right. That is the agreement. That's how it's understood. I think what we're saying here is this is very different. These employees understand up front that a ski area is only open in the winter, or that an outdoor pool is only open in the summer. The expectation from day one is absolutely that this job has a concrete end date, and by accepting employment, they're basically agreeing to that statement. And so I definitely think that this is one of those things that should definitely be sewn up. This isn't cheating anybody out of anything, because they know up front that this job has a defined end date, I guess is what I would say.
Mr. City Manager, I'd have a question. So under these resolutions, you and I had a conversation not too long ago in reference to 911 surcharges. Is this something that we could pursue underneath this? And I guess just let everybody know what I'm thinking of is that each cell phone bill, and we've tried to get this passed for years, but each cell phone bill, there's a 911 surcharge paid on each phone line, but that money goes back to the billing address, not where it's being used. And so the example that I would have is that you have multiple oil field or energy sector related people that are in the state of Wyoming, that are in our county or neighboring counties, that are utilizing their cell phone living here, but their billing address may show Oklahoma City or Houston, Texas. And unfortunately, that surcharge tax it that we would depend on for our 911 system here actually gets sent to Houston, Texas, or Oklahoma City. And I think that we need to look at a way that we can collect those taxes by the area that the phone's actually being used in. Because if, in fact, they needed to call 911, it's going to be here, not in Houston or Oklahoma. So that's one of those things that if we can use this avenue to address that issue, I would ask that we do so. And I'd open that up to anybody that might have a comment on it. Councilman Bates.
I'd agree with you totally, Mayor. I think that would be a good one to pursue. So thank you for bringing that up.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cathy.
Yes, excuse me. I would totally agree with that on the cell phone surcharges. And I also agree that with Mr. Hopkins and with Vice Mayor Lutz that seasonal employees should not be drawing unemployment. You took that job. It was a summer job. Your job basically is going to school. And we don't need to be paying them to go to school.
Okay, Mr. Manager, so if I'm hearing this right, are we looking to move forward on all of these or all but one of them?
Mr. Mayor, I think the idea would be that we would get direction on whether or not we need to move forward on all of them, or if there are any exceptions. And then additionally, if everybody concurs with the idea of the additional resolution with respect to 911 surcharges.
Okay, so let's take these one at a time. I guess consensus on people that would agree on moving forward with the additional resolution for 911 surcharges. Okay, looks like we got a thumbs up all the way around. Okay, and then the next one would be on. Okay, thanks, Sean. Next one would be on. Is everybody good in moving forward with all of them that are written, or are there any exceptions that anybody would like to see taken out of there?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cathy.
Yes, were we going to go ahead and try to remove the business about the names and the one with the salaries?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cathy, that's a good question. I think I heard council say yay on that, but that probably bears a thumbs up request as well.
Okay, so let's talk about that one in particular. Give me a thumbs up if you're in favor of keeping the resolution in dealing with the names being published with pay. Okay, thumbs down if. Okay, give me a thumbs down if you're against that. Okay.
The names. Okay.
Okay.
So the phrase, we need to work on the phraseology with respect to requesting them not to keep names at the legislative level. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
So we got direction on everything then, or are we still?
Do we need to pull any, did we get that blessing to not pull any?
Councilman Powell.
Mr. Mayor, this may be too confrontational, but last time this subject came up, I pointed out that there have been a number of attacks on the whole concept of home rule. And I don't know, Mr. City Manager, if this has come up in your LLC meetings, but it seems to me that rather than react to each one individually, that it might be advisable for WHAM to simply make a strong, proactive statement citing the court decisions that buttress the whole concept of home rule, so that we're in a defensible position the next time another attack comes up because somebody didn't like the decision made by county government or city government and decided to talk their legislator into passing a law against them making that kind of decision and restricting their authority. So I don't know. It may be too controversial or too confrontational, but I guess I'd like to at least initiate the discussion of whether it would make sense for WHAM to take that position very clearly that home rule matters.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, we have prepared a resolution of a similar nature, and so it certainly wouldn't be hard at all to resurrect that language and bring it back for your consideration. You bet. I can't say I disagree with Councilman Powell.
Okay. So I need a thumbs up on that, or are we good in doing that? Nope. So, okay, now we're seeing thumbs. Okay, thumbs up. All right. Okay. Is that the end of that one? All right, you bet. Okay, we'll move on to unsafe structures and equipment ordinance. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Tonight we have the opportunity to review feedback and so forth from members of your constituency. We got about 6 or 7 emails over the 3-week period dealing with the unsafe structures and equipment ordinance that we discussed, I'd say almost a month ago now. We thought if council had additional feedback tonight, we could certainly take that and put that into the draft that you would consider on a first reading basis. Otherwise, we take whatever other direction you have, other information we need to research, and potentially bring this back for an additional discussion. Many options available concerning this item tonight.
Councilman Powell.
Mr. Mayor, several of the landlords commented on their sense of the unfairness of being potentially held accountable for egress problems and other sanitary issues that are really the result of the tenant's care of the property, and really not something the landlords can do much about short of eviction. Was Dan or any of the other people who read these comments persuaded by any of these arguments that maybe there should be some division of responsibilities rather than just hold the landlords responsible?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, if I could get a crack at that, maybe Liz would want to chime in, who's also on the call. In the event that we are talking about passage to, for egress and so forth, and it ends up, which ends up being more of a unsafe clutter scenario that again prevents a person from getting out of their home safely, I think that can be dealt with primarily from a tenant standpoint. The issues pertaining to structural safety or appliance safety and so on would likely be the owners to deal with. And so we do think that there is some division of accountability, if you will. I can't imagine we'd be in a good position to have a landowner declutter a tenant's materials and goods and possessions in order to provide safe passage out of their building. Oftentimes we find issues with doors opening and closing. We find windows that don't open. Those kinds of things, in my opinion, would be building owner problem versus a tenant, unless you see it differently, Liz or Dan.
Okay, we're both on. Dan?
Our major concern is to relieve the unsafe condition and not to assign the responsibility, and that's why we would contact the owner, the occupant first, and then the homeowner, and just take it, whatever steps are necessary to get it relieved. We would certainly hope that it would be relieved before the owner would think that they would need to evict someone from that. We would certainly work with them, but we really would not be assigning the responsibility. We would just want to alleviate the unsafe condition. And that's the purpose of the ordinance, to relieve the unsafe condition.
Mr. City Manager, I think I'd ask the question. I go back to, I think it was Randall Carnahan's comments that he had made. Do we in fact have, and maybe Mr. City Attorney, you could answer this, the Wyoming Residential Rental Property Act, would that address the same issues that we're talking about here? First question. Second question is, will this apply just to, this applies to everybody across the board, so the situations that he talks about in his email about people squatting in houses and whatnot, would that, this would fall in under that same category, correct?
Mayor, Council, in fact, this ordinance that's before you would cover all of those. It's not restricted to just landlord-tenant type of scenarios. I think a lot of the scenarios that were brought up as examples in the original work session dealt with landlord-tenant situations, but certainly not all of them. Some of them are just people that are hoarders, people that have some type of physical ailments. But this would give the city an option to actually visit with them and to talk with them if it's reported, and they can make suggestions. I know that Dan and Liz have wanted to be able to help these people. I mean, if you look at community development, they have always gone out of their way, it seems to me, to help people and to get these things taken care of. The concept of a fix-it ticket was raised the last time around, and really that's what the first step of these codes require, is that the building people with the city go in, they write those notices, and if the notices are complied with, that's the end of the matter. It's like a fix-it ticket, though it's not really called fix-it ticket. So I think those are all things that would mitigate in favor of the ordinance and would speak well of the way that the community development folks have drafted this up. And with respect to, let me see, Mr. Cunningham, was it? Carnahan, Mr. Carnahan's statements. The Residential Rental Property Act, it is on the books. It's been there quite a while, but it gets used very, very little just because it's so burdensome upon the folks that it probably would benefit. It, in fact, does assign kind of in a situation of responsibility in that regard. And if the tenant's responsible for it, then the landlord has no responsibility. And if the landlord's responsibility, well, they may come in and fix it, or they may just say, it's not worth my time and money, and so therefore you're evicted. So I think that probably again speaks that there's an element out there, a donut hole of where the current ordinance before you really could be utilized for some people that are kind of poor, maybe not particularly articulate, and this may be advantageous to them, and really at no great detriment to the landlord, and that the landlord, of course, would have the ability to represent himself and to actually would have an opportunity to appeal the decisions of the building inspector.
Okay, and then a follow-up to come back to the fix-it ticket. If a notice was put in place, I would assume that if it would in fact have a completion date, just like a citation would give you a date of which you need to comply, and if you don't comply, then it no longer becomes a fix-it ticket, it becomes an actual fine. Would that be correct?
I believe that the ordinance and the codes that from which that provision is derived make reference to a reasonable time, but I don't know. Probably that's a better question for Dan.
Okay.
That would be based on the severity of the unsafe condition, whether it needs for the time to be set. If it is something that is not a life safety hazard to say immediately, there would be a time given, and that would be done on a case-by-case scenario, which we do now with our building inspections department.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Huber.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to agree with everything that Mr. Henley just said, but I think also that it's important to realize that the Wyoming Landlord Act that only sets up civil remedies as between the landlord and the tenant. A lot of if you're talking just about landlords and tenants, a lot of these tenants are really not in a position to assert their own, to stand up very well for themselves. Because as Mr. Henley said, the landlord very well might just come in and say, well, that's okay, I'm shutting the building down, get out of here. And tenants are very afraid of that. But also, but the big, more overarching thing is that this gives the city some power to come in and say, hey, wait a minute. Some of these violations are so severe that as a matter of life safety, building safety, things like that, we're going to step in. We're going to issue a warning to you. You need to get this taken care of, and then proceed from there. And this legislation would also refer not only to landlord-tenant, but also to safety of other dwellings that I think is really important. And so please don't be confused and anybody think, oh, well, we've already got a state landlord-tenant act, because that's woefully inadequate for the kind of things that we're talking about trying to remedy here.
Okay. Councilman Hopkins, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Huber is right. These people that are on the low end of the rent scale do not have much power over what they do. And their landlords are, I've done a lot of rental houses over my life, until we got real jobs. And it was really cool every once in a while when you get a landlord that would really cooperate with you and say, I'd like to paint the bedroom, I'd like to replace the water heater. And we did that. And there are a lot of them out there that don't do that. And so I think we need to have something that at least lets us go in through a number of different opportunities to look and say, this is not habitable. My wife and I lived in places where we moved because they were uninhabitable. And I think we need to give these people a little bit of help, because there really are some places that you really don't want to live. So anyway, thank you.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to just see more of a definition or a separation between landlords and tenants and private homeowners. That seems like it goes more towards landowner or landlords and tenants, but I'd like a more clear definition separating the private homeowners and then landlords and tenants, and maybe something more that would fit private homeowners is what I'd like to see in this.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
So I guess I have a question for Dan. Dan, is it almost always like landlords and rental type of situations where you guys are seeing these egregious living conditions, or has it occurred in people like that own their own homes where, like well-being checks are being done where there's children in the homes? Because I guess to me, I don't know that home ownership really is the differentiator here. I think what we're talking more about is livable conditions, regardless of who owns the home.
That's correct. Because you own the home should not relieve you of the requirement to have a occupancy that's safe for occupancy and have unsafe conditions in it. And I would say it is probably 50-50 as far as landlord, rental, or private homeowners that have these conditions.
Councilman Cathy.
I didn't see when I kind of glanced through this where it said, when will you do these inspections and under what authority would you do these inspections? Because I don't think private landowners want somebody come knocking on the door saying, I'm going to search your house and decide whether it's livable or not.
Is that for us?
Was that directed for us as a response, sir?
I would like a response.
So this ordinance is complaint driven. Does not give us the authority to go into your home and inspect your home for these conditions. It would be by complaint.
Very good.
Any other questions or comments? You need,
Mr. Mayor, at this point, if council has any other direction or things they'd like to see changed, we could take that, or if council's okay for us to prepare it for formal consideration in a first reading environment, we'd be happy to get that blessing as well.
okay, so are we ready to move this forward for formal consideration? Looks like I got thumbs up across the board. Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to contract renewal with Sustainable Strategies. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We have had a relationship with a firm called Sustainable Strategies now for the period of a year. This was the entity that helped us to put together a lot of the conversation as it relates to the enterprise zones that you're familiar with of about a year ago. This is also the entity that helped us to put together our visits out in Washington, D.C., where we went and marketed ourselves, if you will, for grant funding, particularly along the lines of Midwest Avenue and whatnot. Given that contract is coming due, it is our opportunity to determine whether or not we'd like to continue that relationship with Sustainable Strategies for one more year. As far as an idea for you to consider, we are indeed entering very, very lean financial times. And my concern would absolutely be with respect to trying to preserve revenue as much as possible, wherever possible. But what we don't have moving forward is an entity that would help us to drive a real concerted effort to obtain revenue additional to what it is that we would ordinarily receive, particularly as it relates to projects that we probably won't be able to fund for a while. It is helpful. It is nice to think about the possibility of this firm continuing in our effort on our behalf in partnership with the county, with other communities, and with Advanced Casper to continue that advocacy for another year. I was telling the mayor a little earlier today that if indeed this second year doesn't provide funding or provide fruits of our labor, so to speak, it'd be hard for me to advocate for a third year, but I would like your support for this one coming up.
Any comments? Vice Mayor Lutz.
So I know that we say that in the memo that they engage, on multiple grant applications and things like that. Do we have even a ballpark figure of, grants that we were awarded that we could probably credit their involvement to?
Vice Mayor, you ask a really good question, and that is very much along the lines of what I was wondering about as it relates to being approached for this second phase of this relationship. What I would tell you is that I do think that we received a lot more lift than we would normally as it relates to bigger grants like the Build Grant in Midwest Avenue. I do think that we have a lot more lift as it relates to the I-6 program that Advanced Casper is trying to take advantage of and participate in moving forward, all of which are competitive grants. I was notified of a smaller grant that Sustainable Strategies helped us get into, the prospects of which look very positive, albeit much smaller and relegated to turf and parks type projects. Liz, unless you can correct me here, I am not aware of grants that we've been able to obtain as of yet, but I would confess that typically the kinds of grants that we're going for do take more than one cycle to be able to obtain. Would you agree with that, Liz?
I would, Carter, and I truly feel that we are very poised to get that build grant this go around because of how close in the finals we were this last fall. And I do think it's been a lot of the advocacy that Sustainable Strategies has had in the DC area. Their connections have been outstanding, and their versatility to apply for not only public safety kinds of grants, public works kind of grants. Obviously, we're looking at some of the arts, and again, parks and leisure there across the board. And I do feel that that is a strength that one staff member here at the city doesn't have. I think that they bring out partnerships with us to do the best job we can for Casper and actually get us east where a lot of these decisions are made.
Charlie has a question. Councilman Powell has a question.
Yes, Councilman Powell.
I'd just like to add something since I was on the DC trip as well. These people were very committed to our community and very much invested in having us succeed with the various things we were pursuing. And we were all disappointed that we didn't get the build grant. But one of the things that you relearn on a trip like that is that there's just no substitute for face-to-face contact. And these folks were able to get us lined up with a very tight schedule of meetings with people that they already had relationships with. And there's no way you could possibly do this without the assistance of someone like Andy and Ashley guiding the process and sort of greasing the process and getting you in the door. And so, it's always a gamble when you hire a consultant who's trying to help you be successful with grant writing. But I say this is a gamble worth taking. I think we came very close to getting $2 million. I'm still confused as to why we didn't get it. But for us to put $10,000 in to continue that process seems like a very small amount of money to pay given the potential outcome.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Vice Mayor Lutz.
Yeah, no, I'd say I'm open to seeing it for a second year, but I agree with Carter. I'm going to want some substantial documentation, kind of just stating, what's been accomplished over those 2 years before we were to agree to anything past these 2 years.
thumbs up on that. Okay, so if I could get a thumbs up or down, however you'd want to vote on that. Okay, I think we have enough thumbs ups on it. Okay, you bet. Okay, we'll move on to agenda review. I see we have a few items on pre-meeting agenda. Anything you'd like to talk about, Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, it may please the council to schedule a little more time for pre-meeting next week, given the conversation that we invariably need to have about some feedback from Mr. Henley and myself. Normally we start at 5:30, if I remember correctly. Would you be open to a 5 o'clock meeting that day?
Would the council be open to a 5 o'clock pre-meeting next week? Okay, thumbs up across the board.
Okay. Perfect. We too will have a conversation that evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, with regard to the liquor license sanctions and open container updates that council's been working on. That will likely have some discussion from among the public as well. And beyond that, I think those are probably the bigger items that you will be facing that evening.
Any questions or comments from council on the agenda for next week? Okay, and then if I could ask on the 28th on that council session, we have the National Finals Rodeo discussion on that. Is that our discussion as far as the extension of the contract itself?
Mr. Mayor, you remember correctly, we were going to give you kind of a status, if you will, on how that contract's coming and maybe what some of the issues are with regard to the relationship we hope to foster for another 5 years and stuff. So, yes, that is what that's for.
Okay. Any questions from any of you on the work session agenda 2 weeks from now? Okay. Legislative review, Mr. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor, with the conversation you and your team were willing to share with us tonight, I think I'm good as far as any other updates that might be out there.
Okay. Any questions or concerns on legislative review? All right, so we'll move to council around the table. So let's start off on the bottom of the screen tonight, not the year of the bottom, but Councilman Cathy. Councilman Cathy, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. It's heck to get old, but the alternative sucks. Why is it 2 and not 4 playing on the golf course at a time? You normally play in either 2s or 4s, and even if you're playing a foursome, keep your social distancing and go on. That was a question I had brought up. The other one is, why are the recycle depots closed? Are we afraid that we're going to getting more than 10 at a recycle station? Or was there something with labor requirements in emptying them during these times?
Mr. Mayor, I can give it a crack if you don't mind.
Yep.
Councilman Cathy, thank you for the questions. Working in reverse order there, staff was concerned that with respect to the recycling depots, that posed a lot of surface contact in regards to employees potentially interfacing with contaminated materials. And so the better course, at least from our perspective, was to follow some of the other national trends that are occurring and put a temporary stop, if you will, to those depots being open. As far as the other question is concerned with respect to the opening of the golf course, you are recognizing indeed the very staged opening, if you will, of the golf course. And yes, sir, you're correct. We are trying to be responsive to the notion that social distancing is an issue even out there at the course. We selected two originally, mostly because when you get 4 scrambles going and so on, there's a tendency to engage with other staff and potentially other folks that are there for the ride. I don't know that that's a real problem to switch from 2 to 4, but at least that was the logic, if you will, for folks getting out there and enjoying the course prior to fee collecting starting and actual season being opened.
My concern is even according to the memo, even once the season is open, May 1st, you're still only allowed to go out in twosomes. And then you have to be in individual carts.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cathy, I absolutely believe that we can bring that back and have a larger discussion with you and talk about that. The carts are a little easier for me to get behind because indeed it's hard to keep your distance when you're seated shoulder to shoulder in a cart. I believe that there probably are nicer carts out there that folks use, but as far as the fleet that we use, that wouldn't be the case. But in terms of an on-foot team, I think we have room to talk about that.
Well, and actually, I wasn't concerned quite as much about the individual carts as even still a twosome, even after the 1st of May was all that was going to be allowed. And that concerned me. That concerned the constituent that was calling me, is that why are we still only allowing 2 people? So yes, let's definitely bring that back up for further discussion if that's possible.
No problem.
Do you have anything else, Councilman Cathy?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say thanks again to all those people that did email us, whether they were for that ordinance or if they were against it, just hearing from the amount of public and paying attention to what we're doing and trying to hold us accountable for what we do. I really appreciate each one that came out and or spoke out to it. We had 133 people on YouTube watching it, so it was important to our citizens. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that reached out to each one of us. And thanks for every one of you guys that responded back to them and that what we're trying to do to keep our community safe and everyone that's trying to keep our community safe. So thank you to everyone.
Councilman Pacheco.
I don't have too much. I think the quandary that we face with things like COVID is the balance between our liberty and also trying to figure out a way to keep our community safe. I think it's easy to post things on Facebook and to say things on there to express your feelings. It's another thing to actually do what I know our city staff like Carter and the mayor, the county commission, people that have been working to try to figure out solutions to be able to create this safe community. And so there is a huge fine line between how we balance that and people's safety. I know that one person did reach out to us who is at risk, is on oxygen, and that's a real threat. I would beg to say, what do we say to her? Or what do we say to my 80-year-old parents who are at risk because of their health concerns? Those are real questions that we have to face, and they are not disposable people. They're not some type of statistic that we look at to say, well, it's part of, if they're sick, that's what's going to happen. We need to be able to face that and come up with a real solution. And sometimes that takes some courage, and sometimes that takes facing how we do that. And so I hope that we can face that as we deal with this situation, not only in our city but in the state. So I just want to thank the staff and people that have been working and meeting constantly and doing all those things that are really tough. So I appreciate it, and I know it's not been easy. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Behind me, you see a picture of the Wyoming. The Wyoming was a collier in 1900s, early 1900s. And it was, one of the owners was a guy by the name of B.B. Brooks. This turned out to be the largest sailing ship ever in the world. And it turns out that what it did, it hauled coal. And our people in the coal business and the oil business, they need our help. And so go buy lots of gasoline. But in any case, I also want to thank staff tonight because this is a difficult meeting, and I think we got through some things that were really hard issues. And I think thank you guys all for your help. And, I enjoy working with everybody on council. It's just a great organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to say that I think we need to continue to tread lightly when it comes to trying to find a solution to this issue. Even the authors of our Constitution have always erred on the side of individual liberty over a sense of security. I understand the need to keep the community safe. I understand the actions need to be taken, but we need to be careful when we make these decisions. This history has shown us that a lot of times once power is removed from the people, it's never given back. So I will continue to be outspoken when it comes to civil liberties, but I also think that the community needs to do their part. People do need to be practicing social distancing. They need to be doing their part in keeping this virus at bay. But I think as a government entity, we need to be careful on how we make the decisions that we need to make in the coming weeks.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'd also like to comment. We all want the same thing here. We want to achieve herd immunity so that we can go about our business. We want for the governor to feel comfortable lifting his order, but we want to be sure that the second wave isn't worse than the first wave, which is what happened with the Spanish flu. And there is a risk of that. But I'm very proud of this community. I think for the most part, people are doing what we should be doing, which is why our numbers are low. And I think we should also police ourselves a little bit. And when people know that someone has been exposed, to remind them that this is a time for them to lay low and be mindful of other people, that they could in fact be a danger. But I prefer to have the least amount of government involvement as possible. But this is a very deadly business, and it's a very tough balancing act. But I just think we should all remind each other we all want the same outcome here, and it's just which risks do you want to take? So, and I also want to one more time extend my thanks to Mayor Friel, because I know this has been extremely time-consuming and interfering with your life and business in many ways. And It's very important work that you're doing leading the community. So thank you for all the time. And that, of course, extends to Carter Napier and Mr. Henley and all of the city staff. I think we've acquitted ourselves very well as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Huber.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to echo what Councilman Powell just said. I really, truly thank you and Carter and the city staff for all the work that you have put in on this. I know you guys are just doing a yeoman's effort, and I really feel confident in the leadership that you are demonstrating here. Tonight was an example of we had an issue that's a contentious issue with people who have sincere and deeply held positions on different sides of an issue. But I admire the fact that in Casper, and specifically on this council, we address these things in a civil manner, not address them in a divisive us versus them kind of a thing. We work towards trying to solve these problems, not just make it us versus them or whatever. And I'm really proud to be a part of that. I do have a couple of things I want to say. I don't think that as elected officials, we can always have the luxury of saying, well, most of the people have told me they favor this or oppose it. We have the obligation to do what our best judgment tells us is the thing to do under a given circumstance. And that can be a tough issue and a tough call to have to make. The other thing that I want to say is that among all of the emails and phone calls that I've gotten, I have been astonished at how many people are quoting grave misinformation as being absolute gospel. People need to pay attention to hard news, not social media rumor. This is a time that they need to pay attention to hard news. The governor is conducting press conferences on a regular basis. This stuff is being published on a regular basis. People need to pay attention to hard news, not social media rumor. And those are the things that I want to emphasize. I think we're all interested in doing what's right, and I really appreciate working with everybody here.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Lutz.
I would just say I definitely think we made the right decision not to punish people as far as fines and potential jail time. As we discussed, obviously the jail time presents its own issues and concerns. So I definitely think we made the right move there. The one thing I'd bring to note, and I know a lot of major media outlets have picked up on this, everyone is obviously dealing with this in their own way, but for some individuals who already have a natural or already have a proclivity for maybe depression or suicidal tendencies, right now is a really difficult time. And so I would just ask, reach out to your friends, reach out to your family. Obviously, for those people who are lucky enough to be given the privilege of working from home, they also might have small children at home. They are also trying to school on top of doing their jobs, on top of being trapped in their homes. And so definitely reach out to your friends and family and just, if nothing else, just call and say hi. Make sure everyone's doing okay.
Thank you. I guess a few things that I would say tonight is that we still have our issues that we have to deal with when it comes to keeping the sickness out of the community, and I just want everybody to know that not tonight, but for the last several weeks, that's been on the very forefront of our minds on how we're going to sustain and keeping these numbers down low. I really have to say thank you to everybody in the community itself, because really, if you look at the numbers and you look across the state and some of the other communities, we're doing outstanding for the size of our community compared to some other places in this state. And I think that that's very important to say, that a lot goes to the way that people are paying attention and doing what needs to be done to keep those numbers low. And I want to keep it that way. That's why I'm just so hard pressed on trying to find a way that we can put an end to, keep having this sickness go out in the community. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but it's still a problem we've got, and we've got to find a solution. I just don't want this to get out of control, and that's the biggest thing right now. Is I just want to keep this community healthy and not allow this to go any further. Two other things: the College National Finals Rodeo. Unfortunately, that was another event that we had to cancel, and but I want it to be known too that, you know, the national the rodeo association itself, for the amount of money they've already put in, they're over $100,000 in debt, or not in debt, but they've lost on the cancellation of this. But had we let this go another 30 days with everything that had to be put in place to put that together, they would have been looking at a $500,000 loss. And we're not going to put them in that position. We don't want to put them in that position. In fact, quite the contrary. Next work session we have, I look forward to hopefully extending that contract out so Casper gets it for another 5 years, and we keep that event strong here. So, you know, it sickens me that we have to continue to cancel these things, but at the same time, I think it was the right time to do it, the right thing to do for that organization, and you know, we'll just regroup and go from there. And the last thing I want to put out is to save the date. And I want the public to know that starting May 14th through May 29th, the filing period for people who want to be on Casper City Council. And I put that out there because there's going to more than likely be some vacancies, and there's terms that are up across the board. But that's the dates to file. So I openly ask people that want to be a part of this council and be a part of the solution, then just please write those dates down. That's the time to get your applications in and come be a part of this. So with that, I don't have anything else to add tonight. So I guess we'll call that an evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Skipper.
Oh, I think it works fine. I mean, I definitely.
Oh, I think it's okay. I think it's